Hi guys! Tonight we ease into a quiet, breath-soft world where the prairie stretches out like an endless sheet of brushed steel, and the cold feels old enough to have its own memory. You stand there in second-person boots sinking into stiff grass, watching a sun that is more decoration than heater slip toward the horizon. The air nips at your nose in that playful but slightly cruel way that whispers, "You probably will not survive this if you step out here unprepared." It is the kind of cold that makes your ears ring and your breath drift like a thin ghost trying to escape. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to be part of this little nightly circle, go ahead and drop your location and the local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now dim the lights and let yourself walk forward, sinking deeper into the world of the late 1800s American West, where warmth is less of a convenience and more of a quiet mission. You feel the cold right away. It does not roar or shout, it simply settles on you like a damp letter placed on your shoulders by the wind. There is not much sound, a faint squeak of frozen grass under your boots, the soft metallic rasp of wind along the rim of your hat. You breathe in, and there is the dry mineral taste of dust and distant sage, each little scent sharpened, because the cold has stripped away the noise. This edge of the frontier is an odd place to stand. The Wild West of the 1800s is not the shouting guns blazing carnival that movies like to sell. Out here, it is mostly silence chores, decisions made in the dark and long hours surviving things the landscape throws at you. Real people froze out here, and surprisingly often, they froze without fire, because fire was not always an option. Sometimes wood was too scarce, sometimes the wind was too vicious, and sometimes the danger of revealing your location to strangers made fire far too risky. One mainstream historical fact that slips easily into this cold air is that on many western routes, especially in the Great Plains and parts of Wyoming and Nebraska, wood was so rare that emigrants burned buffalo chips instead, and even those could be too damp to ignite on certain nights. Imagine depending on a fire you cannot even guarantee. You tuck your chin into your collar, feeling how quickly your body starts bargaining. It wants warmth from anywhere. The sky glows with that peachy haze that shows up right before darkness settles its full weight. The cold creeps down your sleeves like a bored cat testing your nerves. Your breath curls outward and disappears. And in this moment, the question that would occupy any traveller becomes the same question steering our whole journey tonight. How do you stay warm in a world that does not offer fire? You take a few steps and the wind shifts with a low sigh. Somewhere behind you, a prairie chicken makes a muffled, almost embarrassed cluck, as if apologising for being awake so late. You catch the faint scent of dried grass carried in the breeze. It is more comforting than you expect. Not warmth, but a reminder that life endures even when the night is sharpening its claws. A quirky little tidbit floats into your mind as you walk. Some frontier travellers swore that singing softly into a scarf helped warm their faces, because the vibration kept air pockets shifting. Whether it works or not is another story, and historians still argue whether this trick was a legitimate folk method or just something lonely cowboys invented to feel less alone on the trail. You picture yourself humming into wool sounding like a sleepy kazoo, and you cannot help but smile a little in the dark. Ahead, the landscape dips into a shallow fold. The ground turns darker, holding onto the last scraps of sunlight. Your boots slide across patches of half-frozen soil. You feel the way the cold subtly changes here, sinking rather than slicing. The prairie has its thoughts, and tonight it thinks in textures: crisp air, quiet grass, hardening ground, threads of wind snaking past your ankles. As you continue walking, you notice how the cold reveals things you normally ignore. Every seam in your clothing suddenly matters. Every gap between layers becomes a tiny window for heat to crawl out. The frontier people knew this intimately. One ill-tied scarf or poorly buttoned coat could be the difference between discomfort and danger. The Wild West is painted as reckless and chaotic, yet the truth is far more meticulous. Staying warm without fire required mindfulness. awareness. You pay attention to the feel of your sleeves, now sensing where the cold is seeping through. It is a small experiment, but it mirrors exactly what countless travellers did every night out here. You crouch briefly touching the ground. It is cold, but not as cold as the air above it. There is a stillness here, the earth keeping a steady temperature, as if ignoring the atmosphere's dramas. That little insight follows you upward as you stand again. Maybe warmth comes not from seeking heat, but from understanding where it hides. A distant coyote calls. Not a threatening sound, just a bored yawn stretched into a note and tossed across the open land. You can practically feel how the cold lifts that sound, carrying it farther than it would travel on a warm night. The stars are starting to appear crisp and confident, like someone has punched tiny nail holes in a sheet of dark metal. You let yourself breathe slower, now settling into the rhythm of the evening. There is no rush in this world. People walked long distances here, not because they wanted to, but because the land demanded it. There were no shortcuts, only choices. You decide to keep going forward because that is what everyone back then would have done. The wind nudges your coat, the sky deepens, and you start to think of warmth not as a single act, but as a series of small deliberate habits. Adjust the collar, flex your fingers, keep moving enough to maintain circulation but not so quickly you sweat and lose even more heat. One historical fact blends gently into your thoughts. Frontier soldiers at remote western outposts used to sleep in every scrap of clothing they owned, during severe cold snaps, sometimes stuffing dry grass between layers for extra insulation. No bonfires, no glowing logs, just fabric, grass and determination. You imagine stuffing grass into your own sleeves and wonder how scratchy it would feel. A small gust dances past your cheek. The night thickens a little more, and you feel yourself slowly accepting the presence of the cold rather than fighting it. That is what people did here. They adapted. They layered, they strategized, they used the landscape as a quiet partner in survival. And though you're just stepping into section 1 of this long drifting journey, you can already sense how many ways warmth can be coaxed into existence when fire is not part of the bargain. You tuck your hands into your coat, take one slow breath, and continue walking toward the deeper dark that waits ahead, ready to show you even more. You keep walking across the settling dusk, and soon the cold brushes over you in that sly testing way that reminds you, every inch of exposed skin is a negotiation. The wind is not fierce tonight, only curious, coiling around your neck like it wants to check whether you have learned anything yet. Out here on the frontier, warmth without fire begins with the simplest and most stubborn truth you're about to feel in your bones. Layers matter more than anything. Not one heavy garment, not a heroic coat, but layers on layers that trap air like miniature blankets. As you stride forward, you understand why people of the West treated clothing like architecture. You do not just wear it, you build it. Your fingers drift to your collar. The fabric is cold, but the heat underneath is an ember you can almost feel pulsing. Settlers in the 1800s knew that trapping warm air was the real secret. That air between layers is what shields you, a quiet little invisible companion you never see but absolutely rely on. Even in the early decades of westward expansion, one mainstream historical fact stands out. Emigrant diaries often describe wearing shirts, then flannel overshirts, then thick vests, then jackets, and sometimes shawls all at once. People sometimes slept in every stitch they owned on a single night. They understood the math of warmth even if no one wrote down equations. You shift your shoulders, testing your own imaginary layers as you walk. The cold tries to slide in at your wrists, that sneaky little gap no one remembers to check until it is too late. You tug your sleeves tighter. The gesture feels small, but the impact feels huge. The frontier rewarded tiny acts of self-preservation. An odd quirky tidbit drifts through your thoughts like a tumbleweed. Some travellers used to tuck old newspapers or catalogue pages under their shirts for extra insulation. It sounds ridiculous until you realise paper traps air better than many fabrics. You picture yourself rustling like a walking library every time you move, and the idea makes you smile in the growing dark. Yet historians still argue whether this was an everyday habit, or something done only during emergencies. Maybe it is a little of both. The West was nothing if not a mix of desperation and creativity. The cold settles heavier against your back now. Night is no longer arriving, it has arrived. The sky above deepens into a smoky velvet. Stars pierce through like tiny glass beads threaded across fabric. Your breath floats outward in slow ribbons. The air tastes even drier, tinged with that mineral flavour only the West seems to create. You feel the ground becoming firmer underfoot as frost takes over the soil. You stop walking for a moment, letting the cold choose its next move. It pushes forward, prodding at your neck. You respond by imagining another layer of cloth around your throat. The old frontiersman always knew to protect the neck first, because it is where warmth escapes fast. A scarf, a bandana, even a scrap of cloth repurposed from a flour sack. The most ordinary item could become armour against the night. As you start walking again, your mind drifts toward the settlers who learned to overlap their clothing the way shingles overlap on a roof. The goal was not simply to stay warm. The goal was to deny wind even the tiniest invitation. You feel the wind testing you now, sliding fingers along your seams. The sensation becomes instructional. A loose button or a crooked flap is not just a nuisance. It is an opening. And every opening is an exit for heat. A coyote howls again farther away now, as if the cold itself carried the sound off into another county. Your footsteps crunch in the stiffening grass. The prairie stretches around you, flattening under darkness, turning into a quiet sheet of soundless land. You imagine the people who lived out here learning not just to dress in layers, but to maintain them like a ritual. Shake out the dust, refasten the ties, make sure the inner shirt stays dry, even if the outer one absorbs frost. Moisture is the enemy. Once it gets inside the layers, heat leaks out faster than secrets in a saloon. You touch your chest through your imagined clothes. You feel the fabric pressing in warm where your hands rest. Air trapped inside behaves like a tame animal staying close doing its job. It is strange how something so invisible becomes your lifeline. The wind rises a little, only enough to murmur. You feel it tug at your shoulders. This time it does not penetrate so easily. You have mentally sealed your layers tight. The sensation is subtle, an almost emotional kind of relief, like closing a door on a storm you do not want in your house. You remember reading that even the famous cowboys, who are often shown bare-chested in movies like they are allergic to winter, actually layered extensively. Wool shirts under canvas jackets under oilskin coats. People love the myth of ruggedness, but the truth is that no one wanted to freeze, not even the legends. As you keep walking, you imagine what it felt like to pull on layer after layer until movement grew stiff. You picture yourself bending your knees slightly, testing how much fabric would bunch around your joints. The cold loves to freeze your elbows first, then your knees. So layers had to be warm but flexible. The trick was to find that sweet spot between comfort and clumsy. You think about this as your boots crunch the brittle grass. You understand why people practiced. Trial and error night after night. A faint rustle appears behind you. Maybe a rabbit. Maybe the prairie just stretching. You do not turn. Instead, you focus on the sensation of your torso warming from your own movement. The settlers figured this out too. Do not walk too fast or you will sweat, and sweat will betray you. But do not become still for too long, or the cold will swallow the remaining heat. You find that slow, smooth rhythm as your arms swing gently at your sides. You notice the tiniest warmth building under your collar. It is not dramatic, not a campfire kind of glow. More like the shy warmth of a teacup held between both hands, small but meaningful. The cold presses again. It does not feel victorious this time. You think about how every layer acts like a whisper, saying, "Not today, not tonight. You're not taking my heat." You keep walking. The stars brighten, the horizon sharpens. You feel your breathing slow into the kind of long inhale that makes your ribs expand under your layered clothing. You understand why so many frontier diaries talk about the night as a teacher. Every hour taught something else. Tonight you're learning the quiet discipline of layers on layers. You adjust your collar once more. You feel more prepared now, even without a flame anywhere in sight. And you keep moving into the deepening dark. You feel the night tightening around you as you walk a slow settling of cold that brushes across your shoulders like a long frosty sigh. The prairie has lost its colour, now replaced by shades of blue and charcoal. Your breath drifts upward like smoke, curling, thinning, then fading. You draw your coat closer, even though it is just imaginary fabric, and you begin to understand why wool became the quiet hero of the West. Out here in this cold that creeps like a cautious animal, wool is not just cloth. It is a partner. You reach down and brush your fingers across a patch of stiff grass, letting them hover over your sleeve, as if checking what material covers you. The settlers knew wool was something special, even if they did not explain the science behind it. A mainstream historical fact rises softly in the back of your mind. Wool fibres are naturally crimped, creating tiny pockets of air that trap warmth and keep it close to your body. These air pockets work even when the wool is wet. It sounds like sorcery, but it is simply nature being practical. You imagine a frontier family shaking out heavy wool blankets, each thread, ready to hold back the cold for another night. As you continue moving, you picture the feeling of pulling a wool shirt over your head, the scratch against your neck, the warmth that builds slowly but steadily. Wool in the West was rarely soft. It could itch, irritate, and rub your skin raw, but no one cared, because it worked. It held heat, and that was the only qualification that mattered. Your boots press into the soil with a muted crunch. The cold, wiry grass bends underfoot. The wind picks up slightly, brushing across your arms. You picture that fabric again, knowing wool behaves almost like a warm exhale against your skin. Something inside the fibre swells when damp. Instead of collapsing into a cold sheet the way cotton does, wool puffs up, creating even more space to hold warm air. You find yourself rubbing your forearm, imagining that slight roughness of frontier wool. Not glamorous, not comfortable by modern standards, but life-saving. A traveller could fall through ice, drag themselves out, wring out their wool shirt, and still retain heat long enough to survive. That is not an exaggeration. People told stories about it for generations. Some exaggerations are tall tales. This one is simply practical frontier wisdom. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some mountain men would deliberately shrink their wool shirts in hot water, so they fit tighter and trapped heat more effectively. It made the fabric denser, almost like soft armour. The shirts became stiff when cold, but once warmed by body heat they softened again. You imagine how strange that must have felt each morning, slipping into a garment that changed personality depending on the temperature. Historians still argue whether women on isolated homesteads blended bits of buffalo hair into homemade wool yarn for extra insulation. Some claim they did it often. Others say it was rare and mostly experimental. You picture a frontier woman spinning yarn by lamplight, deciding whether buffalo hair behaves more like wool or like a stubborn weed. The idea makes you smile. Necessity made innovators out of everyone. The sky above seems even darker now, though the stars grow bolder, pricking through the thick blue-black sheet overhead. The moon lingers low, small and pale, giving everything a faint silver outline. You turn your face upward for a moment, and the cold touches your cheeks with the gentleness of someone checking whether you are awake. As you continue forward, you feel your imagined wool clothing forming a tiny environment around your body, a microclimate that moves with you. Wool did not simply warm people, it created personal weather. You lean into that sensation now, imagining the quiet pride of someone who has walked through snow, ice, sleet, and freezing fog, all without the comfort of fire, because the wool on their back allowed them to keep moving. You run your thumb along your collar again as though inspecting the weave. In your mind, the threads are thick and tightly spun, smelling faintly of lanolin, that natural oil that gives wool its water resistance. Real wool in the 1800s always carried that scent. Slightly earthy, slightly sheepish, but oddly comforting. It was the smell of reliability. Your steps slow as the ground flattens. A faint breeze pushes across the open land, stirring your hair. You think about how a single wool blanket could serve as coat bed and barrier against wind. People wore them draped over shoulders, tucked around waists, even tied into makeshift ponchos. Every blanket was multi-purpose. Every garment had to earn its keep. The cold thickens a little more. Your breath pools in front of you, forming small clouds that drift downward before disappearing. You imagine someone on the frontier pulling a wool scarf to their chin, layering it over another cotton one for extra insulation. The wool would capture breath and turn it warm, creating a little nest of heat around the face. That warmth would then flow downward toward the chest. Nothing about warmth here is dramatic. It is subtle. A whisper, not a shout. You picture a group of travellers huddled under the low sky, each wrapped in wool garments, patched in a dozen places, each one carrying the faint itch of fabric that never fully softens, but no one complains. Complaining wastes energy. Wasting energy loses heat, so they tighten their belts and keep walking. Your boots continue their quiet rhythm in the frozen grass. Your arms swing lightly at your sides and you picture the heat pooling inside your wool sleeves. You imagine the fibres adjusting as your movement generates a little warmth. Wool is reactive in ways people of the West did not understand scientifically, but instinctively they knew it responded to their bodies. It breathed. It flexed. It did not trap sweat the same way other materials did. It kept cold air out, but it also let your skin breathe. If it did not, you would feel clammy, and sweat in winter meant danger. You take another slow breath, letting your chest rise. You feel the wool imaginary fabric warm where your breath escapes into the scarf. You picture how people wrapped themselves like this night after night, trusting the material more than they trusted their rifles or their boots. Without wool, many trails west would have been scattered with many more graves. As you walk, you become aware of how the cold changes when your torso is protected. Your legs still feel a slight sting, but the core warmth generated by movement and wool begins to radiate outward. It feels steady, dependable, like the slow heating of a stone in sunlight. You pass what might be the faint shape of a sage bush, its scent sharp and calming in the air. You let the wind carry that scent through your wool layers. The cold presses close again, but your warmth holds. You imagine a traveller centuries ago testing their sleeves the same way, gently pulling at the fabric to make sure it does not stiffen too much overnight. Wool was never flashy, never elegant, but it turned the people of the frontier into small mobile furnaces, tiny islands of warmth moving across a hostile landscape. You feel that same island forming around you now. The night deepens, the stars sharpen, your steps continue. Wrapped in wool, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in all the quiet knowledge the frontier once held. You continue across the cooling prairie, feeling the night settle more firmly along your shoulders. The air brushes against your cheeks with that crisp, almost metallic edge that tells you the temperature has dropped again. Your breath floats outward in small white curls that drift lazily upward. As you walk, you start to notice how the cold tries to nibble at the exposed patches of skin along your jawline, and you instinctively reach up, imagining yourself rubbing something thicker than fabric across that chilled surface. In the Wild West, people often turned to animal fat when fire was unavailable, smearing it over their skin to form a protective shield against biting wind. It is such a strange-sounding idea now, but out here, practicality outranked elegance every single time. You picture yourself dipping your fingertips into a small tin of tallow or bear grease, both common on the frontier. The texture would feel dense, slightly sticky and warm only because of your hands. As you spread it across your cheekbones, the fat would create a thin, glossy barrier that slows the cold's attempt to steal your heat. The material stiffens slightly as the wind kisses it, but it also holds your warmth close, almost like a soft shell. People of the era learned to trust this method because they had to. You let your mind drift toward one detail often mentioned in frontier journals. Bear grease was frequently used not just for cooking or waterproofing leather, but for protecting exposed skin during cold travel. That kind of versatility kept many travellers alive in conditions that would make most modern folk surrender quickly. You move your fingers again, imagining the faint earthy scent of tallow lingering near your collar. It is not pleasant, but it is familiar, and that familiarity offers its own form of comfort. And then another tidbit floats into your thoughts. odd enough to make you blink. Some trappers believed that rubbing a thin layer of fat on the inside of their wrists helped warm the blood before it circulated through the rest of the body. Whether that worked scientifically is another matter entirely, but personal accounts from the time mention the practice with casual confidence. You can almost feel yourself trying it, now smoothing a greasy film across the pulse point of your wrist, waiting to see whether your fingers warm. There is, however, a lingering uncertainty surrounding the topic. Researchers examining frontier health habits point out that the evidence for widespread grease usage varies wildly, depending on region and cultural influence. Some experts argue that only certain groups relied on this method consistently, while others claim it was far more common than modern scholarship acknowledges. Nothing is settled about how universally this trick was used. What is certain is that the cold did not care who believed what. Anyone on these plains had to decide quickly how to keep the wind from leaching heat from their bones. You take a few more steps, letting the cold tap lightly against your chin. The sensation is milder now, as if the imaginary grease barrier is doing its job. Your skin feels slightly heavier, insulated in a way that is more tactile than warm. You can almost understand why people found the practice reassuring. It gave them a sense of agency in a landscape that frequently ignored human comfort. Ahead of you, the land stretches into a long, shallow slope. The ground crunches under your boots with a brittle, frosted sound. You walk slower, adjusting to the shifting chill. You imagine how someone in the 1800s would have prepared for a night like this. They might have dipped their hands into tallow after tightening their clothing layers, then brushed the fat across their ears, nose and cheeks. A glisten would catch the moonlight, but the payoff was warmth, or at least less cold. In a world without central heating or guaranteed fire saving, even a few degrees of body heat meant everything. The wind slides gently along your neck. You tilt your head, feeling how your imaginary greasy layer would prevent moisture loss sealing the skin just enough to block the worst of the chill. The thought is strangely comforting, almost meditative. You rub your thumb along your jawline as you walk, imagining the softness of warm fat giving way to a stiffer, cold-resistant film. The prairie hushes around you. No animals call, no insects chirp. Only your footsteps break the silence. You imagine a cowboy far from camp sitting cross-legged with a tin of tallow between his knees, working the grease into cracked fingers. The smell would cling to him. His gloves would absorb it. His blanket would pick up a faint sheen. But he would rise warmer, more protected against the weather. Such simple materials were the technology of the time. You think about the texture again. Thick, creamy stubborn. It coats evenly if warmed clumps when cold. You picture the settlers learning how to thin it with a bit of warmth from their palms before smoothing it over skin. They probably shared small secrets about it at camp. Put a little under your chin, press it into your beard to seal the frost out. Let it soak into your eyebrows so ice does not form in clumps. Every bit of advice mattered when the nearest fire might be miles away or too risky to light. You lift your chin and breathe out your breath, forming a pale cloud. The moonlight catches the drifting mist and turns it silvery. The cold feels slightly less sharp now, softened by your layered clothing and the imagined grease barrier on your skin. You start to walk more confidently, your steps longer, your shoulders relaxed. The prairie at night becomes a little less threatening when the cold's bite is dulled. As you continue, you begin to appreciate how much ingenuity went into these small techniques. No one wrote manuals for surviving nights without fire. People learned by watching, experimenting, and refusing to let the cold take them easily. And while tallow or bear grease might seem primitive now out here in this quiet stretch of 19th century wilderness, it becomes a remarkably logical companion. The land rises slightly, giving you a better view of the horizon where the stars pulse softly sharp and cold. The air brushes across your cheeks again, and this time the wind feels curious, as though sensing resistance. You tuck your hands into your coat and walk on, imagining the lingering scent of tallow and the faint shine it left behind. The cold still surrounds you, but it no longer owns you. You have learned another quiet trick of the frontier, one more step in the long journey of keeping warmth close, without a single spark of fire. You descend gradually into a shallow dip in the land, noticing how the air shifts the moment you cross its edge. The prairie above is open and exposed, but here in this gentle hollow, the cold moves differently. It no longer rushes at you. Instead, it settles in layers quieter and more thoughtful, as if the landscape itself is exhaling in long, steady breaths. You pause, listening to the subtle difference in the wind, and you start to realize why people of the 1800s often chose to sleep low, to the ground, on nights when fire simply was not an option. They understood something you are beginning to sense in your bones. The earth gives off warmth, a slow and patient heat that rises through the soil. You crouch and place your palm against the ground. The dirt is cool, but not nearly as icy as the air above. If you press your fingers deeper, you imagine feeling a faint steadiness, a kind of stored warmth the ground has been holding since daylight. Many first-hand accounts from that period mention travellers seeking natural depressions, coulees, or shallow ravines to shelter from the wind and gather what little radiant heat the earth still offered after sunset. These were not deep pits or dramatic caves, just small places shaped by water or weather, noticed only by people who paid close attention. You breathe in slowly. The air down here tastes different too, heavier with dust, softer on the lungs. You step further into the hollow, letting the wall of earth shield your back from the drifting wind. The prairie above continues its icy conversation with the sky, but here it feels more muted, as if the cold has lost interest in you for a moment. A curious little fragment of frontier lore surfaces in your thoughts. Travellers sometimes scooped away the topmost layer of frozen earth or snow to expose the slightly warmer soil underneath, then laid blankets or even spare clothing across it before settling down. The idea was not to touch the ground directly, but to let the heat travel upward through fabric. You imagine yourself clearing a small patch of frost, brushing it aside with your boot before lowering a bedroll the ground beneath slightly warmer than your chilled legs. Of course not everything about this method is perfectly understood. Some modern researchers point out that sleeping too close to damp soil could sap body heat, if done carelessly, while others argue that the benefits often outweighed the risks for short frigid nights. There is no unified opinion on how effective these shallow hollows were across different regions. But as you stand there with your coat hugged close and the air wrapping gently around your shoulders, it is easy to believe the practice made sense. The landscape feels calmer here, almost like a protective hand cupped around your body. You take a few steps further in your boots, sinking slightly into softer earth. The grass is less brittle, lying flatter and darker than the open prairie above. You run your hand along a clump of dried stalks, feeling the coarse, sleepy texture of vegetation that has endured countless winters. You imagine frontier travellers doing the same, gathering these grasses by hand to pack beneath their blankets. Not because it created luxury bedding, but because even a thin layer of dry grass blocked the ground's chill and encouraged the earth's warmth to rise into their makeshift nests. Your breath warms your scarf with each quiet exhale. The hollow feels like a different world, though only a few feet separate you from the harsher air above. Nature can be generous in small, almost secretive ways. People back then learned to read these subtle gifts, a slope that bends just right, a hollow sheltered from wind, soil that retains a whisper of heat after dusk. You realize that surviving without fire demanded this kind of awareness. Every choice had to be intentional. You kneel and press your hand flat against the ground again. The earth's temperature seems to shift with your touch, not truly warming, but offering a muted steadiness. A surprising detail mentioned in several emigrant journals comes to mind. Some travellers dug shallow trenches, the length of their bodies lined them with grass or dry leaves, and lay inside like seeds tucked into a furrow. The trench walls blocked wind from slicing across their backs, while the earth beneath warmed the air trapped around their bodies. These trenches were not comfortable. They were often cramped and awkward. But to someone shivering on an open, plain comfort was a luxury. Warmth was survival. A faint shiver crawls along your arms, reminding you that the cold still hovers nearby, patient and attentive. You pull your coat tighter, imagining yourself preparing a small earth bed for the night. You would smooth the ground with your palms, then shake out your blanket. Maybe you would pat down the dirt to make it level, aware that any ridge or lump would feel magnified in the cold. You picture frontier families doing the same in hurried silence, parents guiding children into low spots whispering that it would feel warmer soon. The idea carries a quiet tenderness with it. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders press against the sloping earth wall. The soil at your back feels firm but faintly warmer than the wind hitting your chest. That difference surprises you. Even a small variation in temperature becomes meaningful in the dark. You tilt your head, listening to the muffled hush of wind gliding over the lip of the hollow. Up there the air is restless. Down here everything is still. Another small, unusual practice comes to mind. Some travellers placed warm stones or even heated metal tools on the ground before lying down, letting the heat seep into the soil beneath their blankets. Without fire, they relied on materials warmed during the daytime sun, capturing residual heat however they could. You can almost feel that warmth lingering underneath you, subtle but comforting. The night thickens. Stars glow like scattered beads across the velvety sky. You breathe deeper now, your body adjusting to the steady temperature of this sheltered spot. You can almost imagine settling here for the night, curling into a ball, trusting the ground to hold enough warmth to carry you until dawn. There is something ancient about the sensation. Humans have been sleeping close to the earth, long before recorded history, long before blankets, cabins, or campfires. In the Wild West, this instinct resurfaced with clarity. When the cold demanded simplicity, people listened. You stretch your legs slightly, feeling how the hollow shapes itself around your form. The land does not judge your presence. It simply holds the temperature it holds. You think briefly of how this technique was not glamorous. No one wrote poems about digging a body-shaped depression in frozen ground. But plenty of people woke up alive because of it. You rise, slowly shaking out your coat. The air brushes your cheeks again, but it feels less aggressive now. You glance behind you, noticing how the hollow blends seamlessly into the landscape, almost invisible unless you know what to look for. And maybe that is the point. The land does not shout its secrets, it whispers them. You step forward, ready to leave this sheltered patch. But for a moment you place your hand once more on the ground, appreciating the quiet warmth rising through your palm like a soft echo from deeper soil. Then you straighten your spine, breathe in the cold air, and continue your journey across the sleeping prairie. You climb out of the shallow dip and return to the open sweep of prairie, where the wind strokes your coat with longer, more deliberate fingers. The night has fully claimed the land now. Stars shimmer with that glassy, unblinking intensity that only cold skies can produce. As you adjust your collar, you notice the breeze shifting direction, sliding along your cheek with a colder bite than before. It reminds you of the men who roamed these regions long before homesteads dotted the plains. Mountain men, trapper scouts, people who learned from instinct, from observation, and from the animals whose skins they wore. You begin to sense why they treated fur not just as clothing, but as a tool with rules and secrets all its own. You touch your sleeve again, and in your mind it is no longer cloth but fur. Thick, layered, dense. The kind that seems to swallow gusts of wind before the cold can reach your skin. These men understood fur in a practical way. They knew which direction it needed to lie, how it should wrap, and how the natural patterns of the hide could determine whether warmth stayed or slipped away. A well-known detail from frontier trapping circles speaks to this. If you wore the fur with the hairs pointing downward, it shed snow and wind more effectively, allowing warmth to pool beneath the hide. Reverse the direction, and you might as well invite the cold inside. Your step slow as you picture how those trappers must have prepared themselves each night. They would spread out their pelts, run their hands through the fur, shake out ice crystals, and sometimes warm the hide by placing it under their coat for a few minutes before wearing it. The warmth would gather quickly, trapped inside the thick fibres. You feel a bit of that imagined warmth now pressing faintly against your forearms as you walk. A curious little practice from the era surfaces in your thoughts. Some trappers lined the inside of their boots with the softer inner fur of rabbits, believing it warmed toes faster than wool. It was not something everyone did, and certainly not something recorded in polite society. But stories mention it often enough that you can imagine crouching beside a small lantern, quietly pushing handfuls of downy fur into your boots hoping it will cushion the cold that creeps in from the ground. It is one of those odd improvised methods that probably felt silly in daylight, but made perfect sense when the night tried to freeze your toes off. You lift your chin slightly as a gust crosses your path. The wind has teeth again sharper than before, and you instinctively imagine pulling the fur closer around your neck. There is something primal about fur. It bridges the distance between human and animal survival, and out here in this quiet sweep of wilderness, you feel that connection more clearly. Fur traps air repels wind and responds to moisture in ways cloth cannot. No wonder trappers cherished it. Still, there is a lingering academic debate about how much knowledge these mountain men borrowed from indigenous communities and how much they discovered on their own. Some researchers argue that indigenous techniques for preparing hides, including the direction and layering of fur, inspired nearly everything trappers later practiced. Others believe the two groups developed similar methods independently because the landscape demanded it. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, blurred by time and sparse documentation. You take another step and imagine the sound of fur brushing against itself, a soft rustle almost lost beneath the whispering prairie wind. The sensation makes the cold feel less intrusive. You think about how a single large pelt could become coat blanket, saddle cover, or windbreak, depending on what a person needed most. That is what the frontier required. Flexibility. Materials that could shift purpose with ease. The ground beneath your boots softens into a more even stretch of grass. The wind slips across it with a hushed, sweeping sigh. You picture a lone trapper bedding down for the night, curling into his fur robe, pulling the thick hide around him, so that only the tip of his nose peeks out. He breathes into the fur, letting his warm breath build a small pocket of heat near his face. The idea feels comforting now. You can almost feel your own breath warming the imaginary pelt around your shoulders. You walk a little further, and the cold brushes your ears. You imagine the thick fur hood of a buffalo robe settling around your head, muting the sound of the wind. Everything becomes softer, heavier, quieter. That is what fur does. It does not stop the cold. It muffles it, blunts. It turns it from a sharp blade into something rounder and easier to endure. Another small frontier detail drifts through your mind. Some trappers wore their fur garments inside out during wet snowstorms, so the dense inner layer would absorb moisture, while the outer layer remained warm enough to dry slightly from body heat. It sounds counterintuitive, but on long journeys without fire, they needed the fur to dry from the inside outward where heat could reach it. You imagine turning your coat inside out and feeling the softer hide against your skin warmer than you expected. You continue walking, letting the wind challenge you now and then while the imagined fur wraps you in steady warmth. The prairie around you stretches into a peaceful dark horizon, faintly glowing under the stars. Your breath drifts upward like pale smoke, lingering for a moment before disappearing into the night. You reflect on how fur was more than clothing to these travellers. It was a strategy, a survival pact, a way of reading the landscape and responding with the materials it provided. You imagine the quiet pride of someone who knew how to prepare a hide properly, who understood how to sew or tie it without letting wind seep through, who could walk into snow with confidence, because the fur wrapped around their body behaved like a living barrier. The night deepens, the wind calms. Your imagined fur keeps its steady, silent warmth against your skin. And as you move forward across the open prairie, you feel a small echo of the knowledge those trappers carried with them, step after step through countless nights with no fire, only fur and instinct keep them alive. You walk deeper into the night until the prairie loses its hard edges and turns into a wide, dark quilt beneath your boots. A faint glow from the stars gives the land a muted silver tint, and every breath you release floats like a thin veil of mist. As you move, you notice a shape ahead of you. Not a creature, not a tree, just a mound of something thick and dark draped across the ground. And then it clicks. A buffalo hide. The kind settlers and nomadic tribes depended on long before blankets were stitched in northern factories. As you step closer, you begin to feel why these hides were treasured. Wrapped properly, they created tiny personal climates that turned frigid nights into something survivable. You lower yourself onto one knee and run your hand across the imagined hide. It feels heavy, almost startlingly, so the thick layer of fur resisting your fingertips. Buffalo robes were prized for precisely that reason. According to period accounts, the plains tribes and traders valued buffalo hides, not simply for their sturdiness, but because the natural layering of coarse outer hair and dense inner wool trapped heat better than almost any other material available in the West. You can sense that structure under your hand now, a world of warmth beneath a world of harsh cold. You lift a corner of the hide and swing it around your shoulders. The weight pulls downward, grounding you instantly. There is something soothing about it, like being held in a steady embrace. As the hide wraps around you, the wind loses its bite. The air beneath the fur warms, almost immediately gathering into a cocoon. You breathe into it, letting the heat spread across your chest. The effect is subtle, yet unmistakable. A peculiar little frontier mention drifts into your memory now. Some travellers claimed that buffalo robes smelled faintly sweet after a long day in the sun, almost like warm hay mixed with something earthy. It is a detail rarely discussed in official histories, but it appears in more than one personal diary. You lean your cheek toward the hide, imagining that scent rising from the fur. It feels comforting, grounding a reminder that warmth often comes with an unexpected aroma of life. As you walk with the hide wrapped around your shoulders, you notice how the fur shifts with your steps, trapping little pockets of air. The inner layer presses softly against your coat, while the outer hair bristles against the wind, breaking its force before it reaches your body. It is not just insulation, it is a complete system. You adjust the hide again, pulling it tighter across your back. A soft warmth begins to gather between your shoulder blades. This is what made buffalo hides so valued. They did not merely warm the wearer, they created a stable personal environment, a realm where the cold could not easily intrude. Out here, that boundary meant everything. Still, the historical record leaves unanswered questions about exactly how common buffalo robes as sleeping shelters were among wagon train migrants. Some modern researchers argue that most emigrants simply could not afford full hides of good quality, while others claim these robes were widely traded and fairly obtainable along major routes. The surviving evidence refuses to settle into a neat conclusion. You imagine both scenarios as you walk. A family huddled beneath a shared robe during an unexpected freeze. A lone wanderer carrying one precious hide that protected him through winter after winter. The truth is probably a mix. You tighten the robe around your shoulders. The wind picks up for a moment, brushing along the outer fur. Instead of reaching your skin, the breeze glides away, deflected by the thick outer hairs. The hide absorbs the chill without complaint. As you walk, your boots brush through patches of stiff grass. The hide sways behind you with each step, its weight giving your body a steady rhythm. You picture someone in the 1800s bedding down for the night under a buffalo hide, curling on their side with the robe wrapped completely around them, fur outward to shed frost wool inward to trap heat. You feel that arrangement in your bones now. It makes sense in a practical, almost instinctive way. Another curious bit of frontier technique comes to mind. Some people layered two hides, one hair side out, and one hair side in creating a sandwich of warmth that kept heat sealed inside for hours. It was bulky and awkward, but incredibly effective. You run your hand along the edge of your imagined robe and imagine what that double layering might have felt like. Probably heavy enough to make standing up a challenge, but warmth always won over mobility on the coldest nights. You breathe deeply into the fur around your collar. The air warms instantly, collecting in a soft pool near your chin. You exhale again and feel the warmth linger. The hide bends slightly as you move, forming little folds that preserve each breath's heat. It is surprising how many small details contribute to comfort here. The way the hide curves, the way the fur shifts, the way air settles inside the layers. You glance at the horizon. The sky has darkened to a deep navy and the stars shimmer like scattered flakes of ice. Yet inside your buffalo hide cocoon, the cold feels farther away. Quiet, less invasive. You feel almost insulated from the night. Your boots find a gentle incline. As you climb, the robe tugs slightly behind you, its weight reminding you of its presence. You imagine countless trappers and buffalo hunters walking this same way wrapped in heavy hides, the cold nothing more than a faint pressure on the outer fur. The land opens before you again, wide and flat. You stop for a moment, standing in silence, the hide wrapped close, the wind glancing off its outer surface. The warmth inside holds steady. The night no longer feels like an adversary. It feels like a companion, quiet and observant, content to let you continue. You shift the hide one last time, feeling the warmth gather at your core. It feels like a small, protected world built entirely from the natural gifts of an animal that once roamed this land in uncountable numbers. A world of warmth carried on your shoulders. You take another slow step forward across the prairie, wrapped in the thick, patient embrace of a buffalo hide, ready to face the long stretch of darkness still lying ahead. You continue across the quiet prairie, wrapped in the lingering warmth of the buffalo hide you imagined earlier, until the land widens into a broad, sweeping plain that feels colder and more exposed than before. The wind shifts, wandering along your shoulders with a slow, curious glide. The temperature dips again, and you can almost sense the cold testing the edges of your resolve. This is the kind of night where anyone travelling alone would begin to consider options they might normally avoid. Out here, warmth is not pride. Warmth is strategy. And that is why, in the 1800s, West sharing body heat was not a sentimental gesture at all. It was practical survival, especially when fire was impossible. You slow your steps as the breeze curls across your face, colder than a moment ago. You imagine yourself settling beside another traveller, maybe a friend, maybe a stranger, both of you pulling your coats close and leaning in just enough to let the warmth pool between your shoulders. According to several frontier journals, people on long cattle drives or winter migrations often slept back to conserve warmth, creating a narrow corridor of shared heat that made cold nights more endurable. There is nothing dramatic about it. No grand scenes, just two people acknowledging that the night had teeth and needed to be handled with quiet coordination. You stop on a slight rise and picture the scene more clearly. A group of riders bedding down on a wind-scoured hillside. They arrange themselves in pairs or clusters, each coat overlapping another blankets, pull tight breaths, mingling in faint smoky threads. You can almost hear the low murmur of tired voices settling into silence, followed by the soft shuffle of blankets as everyone shifts closer. As you stand in the dark, the wind brushes your ear with a colder whisper. You instinctively draw your shoulders inward. It makes perfect sense that body heat became a shared resource. Humans radiate warmth constantly, even when barely moving. The trick is not letting that heat escape into the open air. A curious little note from scattered oral histories surfaces in your mind. Some travellers claim that sleeping head to foot with a companion reduced the awkwardness of huddling while still allowing feet to warm from one another's proximity. It sounds comical in theory, but clever in practice. You picture yourself settling into position, shaking out your blanket, hoping your boots are clean enough for this unconventional strategy. As you begin walking again, the cold grazes your ribs through your coat and you imagine leaning your back against another person's. Your body would warm the inside of your coat and their body would warm the inside of theirs, with a narrow shared space in the middle acting like a miniature furnace. You can almost feel that warmth now, a gentle glow radiating across your spine. The method was not always comfortable, of course. You think of one man tossing another, complaining someone snoring stubbornly into the darkness. Yet the alternative was far worse. The West could deliver killing cold in even the clearest weather, especially at higher elevations. People adapted not because they wanted to, but because the land demanded it. The scholarly record leaves its own uncertainties here. Some researchers disagree sharply about how common tightly clustered sleeping actually was among different groups. Ranch hands reportedly did it often. Migrant families did it selectively. Some indigenous communities incorporated it naturally into nighttime camp arrangements. But the specifics change depending on who recorded the account and when. The evidence refuses to settle neatly into a single pattern. What remains clear is that countless people used shared warmth whenever fire was not available. You walk a little farther, letting your boots press into the cool grass. The wind moves softly but persistently, searching for gaps in your clothing. You imagine yourself dropping down onto the ground beside another traveller, adjusting your layers, each of you, shifting to let the warmth settle between your backs. The prairie night would feel different then. Less lonely, less sharp, more manageable. The cold sweeps across your cheek again. You tilt your head and exhale, watching your breath float upward. Imagine that warm air drifting into a shared space beneath a blanket, rising around your hands or face as you and someone else try to carve out a tiny bubble of protected heat. Another unexpected mention from the old cattle trails comes to mind. Riders sometimes placed a horse between two sleepers, using the animal's body heat to warm both sides at once. Not a glamorous arrangement by any stretch, but undeniably effective. You picture curling beside a warm horse flank, feeling the steady rise and fall of its breathing through the cold, the hide radiating heat like a slow-burning stove. People did not romanticize this. They just accepted it as a matter of survival. You pause for a moment, imagining the stillness of such a night. Two travellers beneath a thick blanket, the wind muffled, the earth radiating faint warmth, a shared breath lingering in the air, the cold's sharpness dulled by proximity. You start moving again, and the sensation of companionship lingers as though someone is walking close beside you. That is the strange comfort of this method. Even when imagined, it takes the edge off the night. The cold feels less victorious when you remember that warmth can be multiplied simply by leaning closer. Your shadow stretches long across the frosted grass as you ascend a gentle slope. The stars glitter above you. The night remains huge and quiet, yet somehow less threatening than before. Body heat may be one of the simplest tools humans possess, but out here in the open west, with wind slicing through the plains, it became a lifeline as essential as food or shelter. You reach the top of the slope and pause. The landscape rolls outward dark and serene. You pull your coat tighter, feel the memory of shared warmth lingering on your back, and take another slow breath. Then you step forward into the night, carrying that small comfort with you as the prairie stretches endlessly ahead. You walk onward, the night deepening until it feels like a soft blue-black ocean surrounding you on all sides. The cold has settled into a patient rhythm, now brushing your coat in long, even waves. Your breath drifts upward in gentle clouds, and with each exhale you notice how carefully you must manage your warmth. Every action matters in weather like this, and that is why, as you move across the quiet land, your thoughts shift towards something deceptively simple. The frontier bedroll, the humble bundle that often meant the difference between a bearable night and a dangerous one. You slow your pace, letting your boots sink into the dry grass, and picture a traveller from the 1800s unwrapping his bedroll with deliberate care. These rolls were not thrown together carelessly. They were constructed with intention and practiced skill. According to accounts preserved in various trail memoirs, a well-prepared bedroll acted like a portable shelter, trapping layers of warm air inside while keeping ground chill from creeping upward. You picture the layers in your mind now. Canvas on the outside to block wind, blankets nestled inside, sometimes even extra fabric or clothing tucked between folds to strengthen the insulation. You crouch a little, imagining yourself spreading out such a roll on the ground. The canvas crackles softly in the cold air, stiff from frost but still sturdy. Inside, the blankets hold a faint scent of smoke and wool. You run your fingers over the imaginary material, feeling the ridges and creases left by long travel. Frontier travellers relied on these rolls nightly, and you begin to sense why. Each fold trapped warmth. Each wrinkle held a memory of heat. A small but unusual detail from scattered cowboy recollections rises in your thoughts. Some riders tied tiny pouches of dry grass into the corners of their bedrolls to increase insulation, believing it added a cushion of still air that improved warmth. It is a trick not often mentioned in mainstream histories, but it pops up in stray journals here and there, hinting at quiet ingenuity. You imagine gathering a handful of grass, stuffing it into a fabric pouch, and stitching it into the corner of your roll. A small act, but one that might add just enough warmth to tip the balance in your favour through a bitter night. You begin pacing again, your coat brushing lightly against your sides, and consider another aspect of frontier bedding. Tightness mattered as much as materials. A bedroll had to be wrapped snugly around the body with no loose flaps for wind to sneak through. As noted in several cowboy accounts from the era, even a slight gap could siphon away valuable heat. The bedroll functioned like a sleeping cocoon. If the folds hugged your form just right, the warmth generated by your own body would circulate internally instead of drifting into the night. As you walk, the cold glides past your cheek again. You lift your collar slightly, imagining yourself settling into a tightly wrapped bedroll, pulling the edge of the canvas up over your shoulder and tucking it securely beneath your elbow. The material forms a soft tunnel for your breath, and you can almost feel your exhale warming the inside space. The wind rushes overhead, but inside the roll, the temperature remains steady and closed. There remains, however, some disagreement among researchers about exactly how standardized these rolls were on different trails. Some suggest bedrolls varied widely depending on cultural influence and available materials. Others argue that many travelers eventually converged on similar designs simply because the harsh conditions demanded it. The documentation is patchy, leaving room for interpretation. But the core idea stays the same. A carefully built bedroll mattered more than bravado on long nights without a flame. Your steps slow again as you picture the process of assembling one. You would unroll the canvas, lay your blankets flat, fold the edges to match your body size, then roll everything tightly from bottom to top. The tighter the roll, the warmer the sleep. You imagine your fingers working stiffly in the cold, tugging the final strap into place, knowing the effort would pay off hours later. A gust of wind pushes gently against your back. You breathe in, feeling the cold pinch the tip of your nose. You imagine yourself lying inside the bedroll, now tucked snugly into its layers, face turned toward a small opening where fresh air drifts in without letting warmth spill out. The blankets press gently against your sides. The canvas shields the wind. Your own body heat pools around your chest and stomach, circulating quietly. Another curious practice surfaces in your mind, something mentioned in a few old ranch letters. Some travelers stuffed spare socks, gloves, or scraps of wool into the folds of their bedroll to create tiny warm pockets they could reach during the night. A cold hand could slip inside one of these pockets and regain warmth without ever exposing the rest of the body. You picture doing the same, sliding your fingers into a hidden pocket of heat, while the wind whistles softly outside the canvas. The prairie around you grows softer in tone as you continue walking. The stars look sharper, the land darker, the air quieter. You can almost hear the faint rustle of canvas and wool, as though the night itself is settling into a bedroll. The idea makes you smile a little. In a way, the entire frontier sleep routine was a negotiation with nature. If you respected the process, the land gave you just enough warmth to make it through. You step forward again, imagining the roll slung across your saddle or strapped to your pack. It feels heavier in your mind than any blanket alone, but that heaviness is a promise. A promise of shelter without fire of warmth, without flame of survival, earned through thoughtful preparation. The cold brushes you once more gentler now. Perhaps it senses that you have learned something important. You adjust your imagined bedroll under your arm, straighten your coat, and breathe deeply into the night air. Then you continue onward, carrying the quiet wisdom of countless nights spent wrapped carefully against the cold. You walk across the dim, widening prairie night, until the wind begins pushing against you with a more serious insistence. Each gust feels sharper, more deliberate, sweeping along your coat, like a cold hand trying to slip inside your layers. You brace your shoulders slightly, realizing that warmth out here depends as much on where you stand as on what you wear. That is when your thoughts drift toward an essential frontier technique, creating a windbreak. Not a permanent shelter, not a heavy barricade, just a simple barrier designed to turn a brutal current of cold air into something gentler. The land around you is open and restless, and the idea becomes clearer by the moment. You stop near a patch of taller grass. The wind swirls past your face, forcing a long exhale from your lungs. You picture a tired traveller in the late 1800s searching for anything that could soften the night wind. According to several contemporary trail descriptions, frontiersmen often relied on low, improvised windbreaks, made from brush saddles, spare clothing, or even upturned wagons to transform a freezing gale into a tolerable breeze. You imagine gathering what you have, stacking it carefully to shape a pocket of still air where heat will not be snatched away so easily. You kneel down and brush your hands across the ground as if arranging a few imaginary branches. The act itself calms you. The prairie hushes around you for a moment, the wind dipping low, then rising again. A spark of understanding settles in your mind. Warmth here is not only created, it is protected. You begin to position your invisible materials one by one, adjusting angles, shielding your back from the wind's direction. A faintly amusing frontier snippet drifts through your thoughts. A few trail cookbooks and cowboy recollections mention riders who position their bedrolls behind their saddles using the awkward shape as a miniature barrier. Some swore that the curved leather and blanket-draped frame created a surprisingly effective pocket of stillness for their heads and shoulders. You can almost see it now, a saddle leaning slightly in the moonlight, blocking just enough wind to make sleep possible. The wind nudges you again, sliding past the right side of your coat. You shift, stepping behind your makeshift barrier, and the difference is immediate. The gust is still present, but less biting, its force broken before it reaches your chest. Your breath slips out more slowly. The quiet space behind the blockade feels like an entirely different environment, calmer and almost warmer, even if only by a few degrees. As you settle deeper into the sheltered zone, you consider how the thickness and angle of a windbreak mattered enormously. According to notes preserved in a few old scouting guides, even a slight misalignment could funnel cold air directly into a sleeper's face, undoing the whole effort. The most effective shelter had to stand between the sleeper and the wind's strongest direction, angled, so the air split around it rather than tumbling inside. You imagine yourself adjusting the barrier, turning it a bit to the left, pressing a corner deeper into the ground. Still, the historical record is unclear about how standardized these windbreaks were. Interpretations differ widely regarding whether migrants and cowboys followed consistent methods or simply improvised each night based on instinct and available materials. Some scholars lean toward the idea that techniques varied so much from camp to camp that no single method dominated. Others suggest that shared experience eventually led to common practices. But without detailed records, the picture remains open to interpretation. You let your hand glide along the top of your imaginary barrier, feeling the wind split against it. The sensation is subtle but noticeable. The cold no longer lands on your chest with full force. Instead, it slips along the edge of the structure, brushing your coat in softened currents. You lower yourself and sit beside your shelter, pulling your knees toward your chest. You imagine the windbreak rising just high enough to shield your head and shoulders, the grass rustling behind it. The silence on this side of the barrier feels thick, almost tangible. The stars glitter overhead like small shards of ice. The air tastes clean and metallic as you inhale. Another small practice comes to mind, something tucked into the margins of a few pioneer letters. Some families travelling west in bitter weather would dig shallow trenches, place their bedrolls inside, and build a tiny windbreak at the head of the trench to keep frigid air from sweeping straight across their faces. Combined with the earth's natural warmth, this setup sometimes offered enough protection to get through a night that might otherwise have been unbearable. You imagine shaping such a trench with your hands, feeling the soil crumble just slightly even in the cold. You lean your back against your imagined windbreak and the cold becomes more manageable. The wind's teeth cannot reach you as easily now. You breathe deeper, noticing how much more slowly the cold creeps along your ribs when the gusts are interrupted by a barrier. Even without a fire, this structure shifts the night's mathematics just enough. You close your eyes for a moment, hearing the muffled hum of air curling around the windbreak. The sound is soothing, low and steady, like distant water flowing around a stone. You picture countless travellers doing the same night after night, shaping whatever they had into something that would soften the wind's relentless push. You shift slightly, tucking your coat closer, the shelter hugging your side. With each small adjustment, you feel the cold losing its advantage. The barrier keeps you safe, not by warming you, but by slowing the escape of warmth you already have. The difference between freezing and enduring is often measured in such small victories. You stand once more adjusting your coat and breathing in the sharper air beyond the windbreak's edge. Then you step back behind the shelter, where the air feels still and marginally warmer, and continue walking, carrying with you the quiet knowledge of how a simple structure can reshape the night. You leave the windbreak behind, climbing gently up the next rise, until the prairie unfurls again across the horizon like a vast, dark blanket. The cold presses forward in a quiet, steady wave, settling along your arms and creeping toward your collar. You breathe slowly, exhaling small plumes of mist that drift away like wandering thoughts. As you crest the hill, you notice a change in the land ahead. The ground looks thicker somehow, as though the earth itself has grown heavier. You take a few more steps and begin to recognize it. Sod land. Deep-rooted, densely packed earth that once offered settlers far more than farmland. It offered shelter. You walk down into a gentle valley where the soil rises in rounded shapes, and you imagine one of those sod structures the early homesteaders built with their own hands. Sod houses, sod bunkers, sod-covered shelters. Places where thick walls of earth held steady warmth long after the sun had faded. One detail firmly supported by surviving settler writings is that sod walls could maintain a surprisingly stable interior temperature compared to thin wooden cabins. Even without fire, these thick earth structures trapped the day's warmth and surrendered it slowly through the night. You place your hand on an imaginary wall, now feeling the heavy density beneath your palm, the way it seems to hum faintly with stored heat. You step closer, running your fingers along the rough root-bound surface. Sod shelters were not elegant. They crumbled, they shed dirt, they smelled of grass soil and dampness. Yet people trusted them because they held warmth the way a thick blanket does. The cold has a harder time piercing earth than timber. You feel that truth seeping into your awareness as you imagine leaning against one of these walls. The air around you softens. A faint, offbeat bit of frontier memory surfaces from old letters. Some settlers sprinkled loose straw inside the cracks of their sod walls to block drafts, believing it acted like a miniature insulation network. Few mention it formally, but scattered descriptions hint at the practice. You imagine stuffing thin strands into small gaps before the wind could slip through the straw, rustling gently as you work. The sky above you deepens into a colder shade of blue. A soft hush hangs over the valley. You can almost picture a family settling inside a sod shelter at night, layering their blankets on the packed dirt floor, trusting the thick walls to keep the worst of the cold outside. You kneel near the ground, imagining the feel of a sod interior. It is cool, yes, but steady. Not the kind of cold that searches for your bones. The kind that simply exists. Even so, the deeper details of sod construction leave room for debate. Experts continue to puzzle over how much these shelters differed region by region. Some claim the northern plains sod houses were sturdier and warmer because the grass roots ran deeper. Others argue that southern sod structures held heat better thanks to drier soil that trapped warmth more efficiently. The historical evidence is scattered, and climate conditions varied widely. The full picture refuses to settle into a single explanation. You take a slow breath, letting the earthy scent fill your imagination. You picture the walls rising around you, thick blocks laid carefully into place, each one weighing enough to anchor warmth inside. You imagine how those walls muffled outside sounds, turning roaring wind into a quiet, distant hum. The interior would feel dim, slightly moist, but safe. The kind of place that dulls the night's sharpness. You rest your hand on the ground, sensing how the earth beneath your knees holds onto a muted residue of daytime warmth. The soil press feels almost comforting, reminding you that the ground does not freeze as quickly as the air. In the 1800s, people depended on this simple fact. The earth absorbed heat slowly and released it slowly. That rhythm allowed sod shelters to remain warmer than expected even on frigid nights. You stand and brush imaginary dirt from your hands. The wind pushes once more across your shoulder, and you take a step closer to where you envision the shelter's doorway. The entrance is little more than a hole framed with timber or branches, But the moment you step inside, the wind fades to a soft whisper. You feel it immediately. The temperature difference is slight but important. A place that does not steal heat from your body is already a place of warmth. You picture spreading a bedroll on the packed earth floor. The ground is cool but not biting. The air feels still the way deep caves feel still. You adjust your coat and imagine lying down inside such a structure, the thick walls hugging heat close to your body. The grass roots woven through the sod blocks create tiny networks of air pockets, and those pockets, though invisible, help prevent warmth from escaping too quickly. A curious image drifts into your thoughts. Some settlers reportedly hung pieces of canvas or old quilts along the interior sod walls to act as a secondary insulation layer, creating a fabric liner that stopped dirt from falling and added a bit of warmth. You can see the cloth now, uneven and patched, hanging slightly crooked, but doing its job all the same. You continue walking through the imagined space, feeling the heaviness of the earth around you. There is a calming presence in these structures. They feel grounded, ancient, connected to the land in a way wooden cabins never quite captured. Even without a fire, the thick soil absorbs your exhaled heat and returns it slowly, creating a loop of warmth that helps carry you through the long, cold hours. You pause near the far wall, laying a hand on the root-laced surface again. The cold outside cannot reach you here. Not fully. The wall feels solid, patient, unmoving. You understand why people slept soundly in these spaces despite the darkness and the isolation. The earth protected them the same way it protects seeds waiting for spring. You step back outside the wind, immediately slipping around your collar again. The contrast is striking. The shelter behind you feels like a warm breath compared to the restless air outside. You pull your coat tighter, glance once more at the thick shapes of sod rising quietly in the night and continue onward with renewed respect for the warmth hidden in the very ground beneath your feet. You walk onward until the prairie begins to dip again, but this time the hollow is deeper, darker, more deliberate in shape. The land looks carved rather than naturally folded, and as you descend you realize why. You're approaching the kind of dugout shelter that made life possible for thousands of frontier families. Not quite a cave, not quite a house. These half-buried homes harness the steady temperature of the earth itself. The air around you grows still, and even the wind hesitates at the lip of the slope as though unsure whether it should follow you downward. You take a careful step into the shadowed depression. The ground softens underfoot. The wind above loses its confidence, breaking apart into thin, hesitant strands. You imagine the entrance of a dugout rising just ahead of you, its roof covered with sod, its floor carved directly into the earth. One detail confirmed by numerous settler diaries is that these underground dwellings remained markedly warmer during winter nights than above-ground cabins built from thin, hurried lumber. You can feel that truth in the air now. Even before stepping inside, the temperature gently evens out. You reach the doorway and pause. The structure in your mind is small, maybe 6 or 7 feet across, with walls of packed earth reinforced by wooden planks or woven brush. You duck your head and enter, and the sensation changes immediately. The wind stops. The night falls silent. The temperature becomes rounder, steadier, almost indifferent to the cold outside. You inhale a faint scent of clay and roots. The air feels cool, yes, but not threatening. Merely calm. You run your fingers along the interior wall. The soil is firm, pressed tightly by countless hands. Families carved these places during desperate seasons when lumber was scarce, and winter crept toward them faster than expected. They built quickly sometimes within a single day. You can picture it shovels scraping children carrying clumps of sod, someone smoothing the roof with a broken board. These spaces were humble, yet functional. Warmth was not a luxury. It was a necessity. A peculiar fragment of frontier recollection drifts into your awareness now. Some families line the dugout walls with newspapers, not only to block drafts, but to create a comforting illusion of decoration. You imagine the crinkled pages pasted unevenly across the earth headlines, curling at the edges, print worn by the moisture in the air. A strange but thoughtful touch in an otherwise bare home. You step farther into the imagined shelter and feel the floor beneath you compacted but springy, with old straw that someone might have spread weeks ago. The faint rustle beneath your boots makes the darkness feel softer. It is easy to see why frontier families sometimes slept without fire in dugouts. With the earth blocking the wind and regulating temperature, a fire was unnecessary unless food needed cooking. Your breath forms a pale cloud in the dimness, but lingers longer, refusing to dissipate quickly. The air holds your warmth too. Still, the historical understanding of dugouts is not entirely complete. No firm consensus has formed about how long these structures lasted before crumbling or collapsing. Some were used only for one winter, others for several seasons. Some accounts praise their warmth, while others describe them as damp, leaky, and prone to pests. The discrepancies make sense. Everything depended on soil-type rainfall and the skills of the builders. The picture remains varied and stubbornly resistant to a single explanation. You crouch near one wall, resting your palm against the surface. You can almost feel warmth radiating back at you, faint but constant. This warmth does not spike or flicker like a fire. It hums patient and steady. The ground beneath your knees feels slightly warmer than the air above. You imagine laying a bedroll here, arranging blankets atop straw, maybe placing a wool coat beneath your shoulders to soften the packed earth. Another small practice comes to mind, something mentioned in an old frontier letter. People sometimes hung heavy coats or quilts over the dugout doorway at night to seal in warmth, letting the fabric act as a door. You can see it now, a thick coat suspended from a wooden peg, swaying gently in the stale air before coming to rest. The effect would be immediate, less draft, more warmth, more life preserved. You stand inside the dugout for a few moments longer. The silence is deep, almost meditative. Outside, the wind presses along the upper lip of the slope, but it no longer concerns you. Down here, the earth holds you. It protects your heat, slows your breathing, guards your rest. You begin to understand why these structures became common among homesteaders, trappers, and lone travellers caught by early storms. A dugout could be built quickly, maintained with minimal effort, and relied upon even during the coldest nights when firewood was scarce or wind made flames too risky. You turn back toward the entrance. The shift from underground quiet to open prairie air is sudden. The wind brushes your cheeks, immediately eager to reclaim your warmth. You step upward, slowly emerging into the night where stars stretch wide across the sky. The temperature feels harsher here, sharper, but now you carry the memory of the steady warmth within the earth. You pull your coat tighter, take one final look at the slope behind you, and continue walking your footsteps, guided by the glowing dome of stars overhead. The ground remains solid under your boots, and you cannot help but feel grateful for the simple wisdom of those who learned that sometimes warmth does not come from flame at all, but from the quiet patience of the soil beneath your feet. You continue walking across the dim prairie until a pale shape rises in the darkness ahead. At first it looks like a small hill, but as you draw closer the outline sharpens. A canvas tent, edges fluttering softly in the wind, stands alone on the open land. The air around it feels slightly different, as though the tent has carved a small bubble of stillness out of the restless night. You slow your steps, feeling the cold press gently against your cheeks, and imagine how many travellers depended on these simple fabric shelters to stay warm without a single spark of fire. You approach the tent and place your hand on the coarse canvas. It is stiff with frost, but beneath your fingertips it still offers a sense of protection. Several eyewitness accounts make it clear that frontier travellers often angle their tents carefully to minimise exposure, allowing the fabric to deflect wind rather than catch it. You understand the logic instantly as a gust brushes the tent's side, rolling upward instead of surging through. You slip inside the imagined tent, ducking your head beneath the edge. The air within is crisp but calmer. The wind no longer steals warmth from your skin with the same insistence. You feel the cold in layers now, gentler, more filtered. The tent's interior smells faintly of old canvas and damp earth, a scent that carries more comfort than you expect. You take a deep breath and settle onto the ground, imagining the flattened grass beneath your boots. With the tent acting as a barrier, your body becomes the main source of heat, and every arrangement inside matters. A small slice of frontier improvisation shows that some travellers pinned spare shirts or scraps of wool against the lower tent walls to create additional insulation, believing it prevented drafts from crawling along the floor. You picture yourself doing the same, pressing the fabric into place using wooden pegs, or even sharp twigs. You glance upward, noticing how the tent's roof slopes inward. The angle is deliberate. If the canvas sagged too low, moisture condensed and might drip on sleeping faces, chilling them unnecessarily. But if the angle was too steep, warm air gathered around the peak and escaped through gaps in the stitching. The frontier required a delicate balance. You can almost feel that balance now, the tent holding just enough heat to soften the night. Interpretations remain unsettled regarding how standardized tent arrangements truly were across the West. Some researchers claim seasoned travelers followed clear, widely shared methods for adjusting tent flaps, anchoring corners, and layering bedding. Others argue that practices vary dramatically depending on the region, the weather, and the individual's experience. The written record simply does not provide a tidy answer. You sit inside the canvas and feel how easily each choice could change the night's outcome. You shift your weight and pull an imaginary blanket around yourself. The tent amplifies even the smallest warmth. Your own breath thickens the air slightly, warming the space near your face. It is not enough to make you comfortable, but enough to blunt the cold's bite. The tent walls ripple faintly as the wind brushes them again, and you listen to the muted hum of the fabric. Another faint memory preserved in family accounts comes to mind. Some pioneers sprinkled a little dry dust or sand along the tent's lower edge to keep the fabric sealed against the ground, preventing cold air from sneaking underneath. You picture brushing a small handful of earth along the perimeter, feeling how it settles into the tiny gap, forming a natural draft blocker. It is an unexpectedly clever technique, and imagining it makes the interior feel slightly warmer already. You shift your legs, noting how tent floors often collected cold first. The earth beneath you is cool but steady. You imagine a traveller placing saddle blankets beneath their bedroll to add cushioning and warmth. The layering makes the floor livable, turning what might have been a freezing patch of soil into a tolerable place to sleep. You run your fingers lightly across the imagined fabric, feeling its coarse texture. The wind pushes harder outside, but inside the tent the force becomes a soft, even rustle. You move closer to the upstream wall, pressing your palm against the canvas. It bends slightly, then settles back into place. You realize that the tent does not need to be strong to be useful. It only needs to break the wind's rhythm, slow it down, soften its blow. You lean back on your hands and breathe out, watching your breath form a faint cloud that lingers near the canvas ceiling before dissipating. That lingering cloud is your warmth, trapped momentarily inside this small pocket of protection. You turn your head, listening for any sound beyond the canvas. Nothing but distant wind and the gentle shifting of the prairie grass. Another technique described in a handful of emigrant letters drifts into your thoughts. Some travellers tilted the tent flap inward at night, fastening it loosely, so that a bit of warm air stayed near the entrance rather than escaping outward. It sounds counterintuitive, but the slight inward fold created a small thermal cushion that helped retain warmth. You picture adjusting the flap now, pinning it just so, watching the fabric draw in softly as the tent breathes with the wind. You settle deeper into the imagined shelter, appreciating how the canvas changes the entire atmosphere of the night. It does not warm you outright. It simply stops the cold from draining you faster than you can recover. And out here, that difference means everything. You tighten the blanket around your shoulders and feel your own heat start to build, faint but persistent. The night outside remains vast and frigid, but within the tent you occupy a small, manageable world. The fabric around you is thin, patched in places, but it holds a quiet promise. As long as the wind is softened and the warmth is kept close, you can endure the darkness. You inhale slowly, let your breath warm the air again, and listen as the canvas walls rustle like a steady heartbeat. Then you lift the flap, step outside, and rejoin the open night, carrying the calm of that sheltered space with you as you continue your journey across the sleeping prairie. You continue across the prairie, the night deepening into a cold so crisp It seems to ring softly in the air. Your boots press into the frosted grass, and each step releases a faint crunch. The horizon rolls like a dark, sleeping ocean, and the stars scatter overhead in pale, unblinking patterns. As you walk, the temperature sinks further, brushing your face with a chill that feels almost glassy. It is the kind of cold that forces people to think creatively. And in the 1800s, when fire was too risky or impossible, travellers sometimes turned to the land itself for warmth. Not the soil this time, nor the shelter of canvas or sod, but the stones scattered across the plains, holding secrets absorbed from the sun hours before. You pause beside a cluster of low rocks, their shapes rounded by wind and time. At first glance, they appear cold, uninviting, but you kneel and lay your hand on one. The surface is chilly, yet beneath the outer layer you imagine a faint reservoir of warmth, lingering from the earlier sun. Reports left by explorers and surveyors note that certain dense stones, particularly darker varieties, retained gentle heat long after dusk. The warmth was not dramatic, but it was steady enough to make a difference when pressed close to the body. You lift the stone in your hand, feeling its weight. The cold surface numbs your fingertips for a moment, but you imagine tucking it inside a bedroll, so the deeper warmth has time to rise. The stone becomes a quiet companion, a tiny, understated ember without flame. The thought makes you smile slightly in the night, appreciating how simple objects could become anchors of comfort. A strangely inventive workaround described by a few travellers involved placing warmed stones beneath blankets to create a brief burst of heat at the start of the night. The trick relied on stones heated earlier in the day by sunlight or by carrying them inside coats while walking. You picture someone gathering rocks at dusk, selecting the darker ones that heated most easily, sliding them into cloth pouches to avoid the initial shock of cold skin against stone. The effect would be subtle, but when temperatures plunged, even a subtle difference mattered. You stand and cradle the rock in both hands, imagining how frontier families arrange stones in a triangular pattern, beneath bedding to distribute warmth evenly. The idea feels practical, almost instinctive, and yet the use of natural heat sources like these sits in a hazy corner of historical understanding. Historians examining the evidence reach different conclusions about how widespread the practice really was. Some diaries mention it casually, suggesting it was fairly common. Others omit it entirely, hinting that only certain regions or groups used the technique. Without consistent accounts, the truth remains pleasantly uncertain. You take a slow breath, lifting the stone toward your chest as though testing its warmth. The night wind slides past your shoulders, but holding the rock creates a tiny bubble of stillness, a small moment of grounded presence in a world of restless air. You tuck the stone beneath your coat for a moment, feeling how your body heat meets the stone's quiet density, warming it further. You imagine yourself as a traveller settling down for the night, gathering 2 or 3 stones that once basked in daylight. You would wrap them in a wool scarf or slip them between layers of blanket, letting the warmth drift upward. If placed at the feet, they could keep toes from going numb. If placed at the stomach, they could warm your core slowly and steadily. You picture yourself fussing with the arrangement, adjusting stones until the heat flows just right. Another faint detail whispered in scattered family stories comes to mind. Some people claim that stones from riverbeds held warmth longer than stones from dry ground, attributing this to the density created by centuries of water-worn polishing. Whether accurate or not, you imagine searching a riverbank at dusk, sifting through rounded stones, until finding one with just the right weight and heft. It is a strangely satisfying thought. You step forward again, carrying the imaginary stone now tucked close to your torso. The cold no longer feels quite as sharp. You imagine placing the stone inside your coat for the first half hour of the night, letting it warm the surrounding fabric, then slipping it into your bedroll so the warmth spreads further. You picture someone else doing the same on a lonely trail, crouching behind a bush as night settles in, arranging stones like quiet little guardians around their sleeping form. You kneel again, set the stone down, and touch another nearby rock. Different texture, different density. The stones here feel like fragments of an old story, relics of ancient heat and winter survival. You sense how many travellers must have placed their hopes in these small, steadfast objects when fire was too dangerous to kindle. Perhaps thieves lurked nearby. Perhaps there was no wood. Perhaps the wind was too strong. Whatever the reason, the stones served without complaint. Inside your tent or bedroll, these stones would radiate warmth long enough for your own body heat to take over. You imagine waking in the night, touching the stone with your fingertips, finding it still warm enough to soothe your skin. A simple gift from the sun carried through the hours of darkness. You rise slowly and let the wind skim across your face. You slip the stone back into your coat for one last moment, savouring the warmth it holds, tiny but unmistakable. When you finally set it down again, the night feels slightly less harsh. You continue walking footsteps soft against the frosted earth, carrying with you the quiet memory of a warmth stored in stone, patiently waiting for whoever might need it. You move through the deep prairie dark until a faint shape emerges on the horizon, warmer in outline than the cold landscape around it. At first, it looks like a low mound or a cluster of shadows. But as you walk closer, soft breaths drift into the air, turning to pale mist. A small group of animals stands quietly against the night. Their bodies rise and fall in slow rhythms, unfazed by the cold that keeps tugging at your collar. And suddenly you understand why countless frontier travellers and homesteaders chose to sleep near livestock when fire was impossible. Warmth in the West often came with a heartbeat. You approach the animals and pause a few steps away. Their silhouettes blur gently in the moonlight. You imagine yourself stepping closer, brushing your hand along a thick fur coat or a broad flank. Several eyewitness testimonies from cattle drive journals highlight that the large bodies of horses, oxen, and cattle radiated steady heat throughout the night, especially when huddled together. That warmth did not come in bursts. It pulsed quietly, predictably, like a slow-burning ember wrapped in hide. You stand beside an imagined cow, now placing your palm near its side without quite touching. The air feels distinctly warmer here, rising in gentle waves. You breathe it in. The cold on your face softens. The prairie wind still whispers around you, but the immediate pocket of warmth changes the night entirely. You picture a weary rider settling down beside his horse, pulling his bedroll tight and aligning his back with the animal's ribcage. The warmth shared between them would create a slim yet vital buffer against the freezing air. You can almost feel your spine warming now, as though the animal's slow breathing pushes warmth into your bones. A quiet, unusual detail survives in a few scattered trail letters. Some travellers position themselves between two animals, letting the heat from both sides pool around them like a natural furnace. It sounds risky and awkward, yet it appears in enough accounts to suggest it truly happened. You imagine kneeling between two calm, steady creatures, both radiating heat while the wind sweeps harmlessly over their backs. The idea feels oddly comforting, especially now as your breath forms thick clouds in the cold air. Scholarly views diverge sharply when discussing how common this technique really was. Some historians believe sleeping beside livestock occurred routinely during cattle drives and winter migrations. Others argue it was used selectively only in harsh conditions or when travellers lacked proper gear. Because written records vary so widely, no definitive reading has emerged, leaving the practice with a slightly mythic quality. But out here, feeling the imagined warmth rise from the animals, it becomes easy to believe. You step closer to a horse, now letting your hand rest lightly against its neck. The warmth beneath the hide feels deep and steady. Horses, after all, generate immense heat simply by existing. You imagine tucking your blanket around yourself, leaning into that warmth, your breath blending with the animal's slow exhale. The horse shifts gently, a soft grunt breaking the stillness. Its breath rises like steam drifting into the cold air. You picture the way a traveller might settle into the shelter formed by the horse's body. Not touching fully, just close enough to benefit from the warmth. The horse would continue chewing or dozing, largely indifferent to the human seeking refuge beside it. Another fragment of frontier recollection surfaces now. Some ranch hands believed that sleeping near the hindquarters of cattle provided the strongest warmth, though others swore by the shoulder. No formal study recorded these claims, of course. They were practical observations whispered during long drives. You imagine choosing your spot with care, finding that perfect distance where warmth reaches you without risk. You kneel in the grass, listening to the gentle snorts and rustling movements of the animals. Their steady presence calms the air around you. You can feel your body relaxing in response, letting the cold slide from your shoulders. The animals' heat forms a sanctuary, a quiet island of warmth in a sea of freezing night. You imagine curling up beneath your coat, the ground cold beneath you, but the air around your back softened by the animals' warmth. You picture your breath rising in steady plumes, mixing with the animals' breath, creating a tiny cloud of shared heat. It is not grandeur. It is survival woven into companionship. The prairie wind grows stronger for a moment, brushing against your exposed cheek, but you barely notice it. The animals shift slightly, clustering together, their combined warmth increasing. You step into that cluster, letting your imagined coat brush against a woolly side. The cold dissolves almost instantly, almost. You stay there for a moment, absorbing the quiet rhythm of their breathing. You realize that warmth like this is ancient, older than tents or blankets or human inventions. Before fire, before tools, warmth came from bodies pressed close, surviving together against the dark. You straighten and step away gently, the warmth fading as the night wind touches your face again. The animals continue standing, calmly unfazed by your departure. You wrap your coat closer, feeling the memory of their heat lingering on your back. Then you walk onward, guided by the stars and the soft echo of warmth you borrowed from the living creatures of the night. You walk farther into the night, the prairie flattening out into long dark fields that seem to echo your footsteps back to you. The cold brushes your face in delicate needling touches, and the wind brings with it a faint scent of sage. Your breath drifts upward in slow, ghostly wisps. As the temperature slides even lower, you begin to understand why people in the 1800s West turned to anything they could find, including remedies grown in the soil itself. Tonight, your thoughts drift toward the quiet, earthy realm of herbal warmth, aids the kinds of plants that frontier travelers believed could stoke inner heat when fire could not. You move toward a patch of low brush that looks darker than the surrounding grass. Kneeling, you brush your hand across the stiff stems, imagining the dry leaves crackling under your fingertips. Multiple frontier accounts consistently describe settlers and indigenous peoples gathering certain herbs thought to warm the body from within, not through superstition but through long observation. You picture a traveller plucking a handful of dried leaves, crushing them between his fingers, and letting the aromatic oils rise into the cold air. You bring your fingers to your nose and inhale. Even in imagination, the scent seems warming, somehow subtle but grounding. Plants like wild ginger, yarrow, and prairie sage carried reputations for stimulating circulation or easing the chill that crept into stiff joints during long nights. Whether those effects were strong or mild hardly mattered. Out here, any hint of warmth counted. You straighten and walk again, imagining the crunch of brittle stems beneath your boots. The night around you feels colder, heavier, and you begin to picture the ways people would steep herbs in warm water earlier in the day, then drink the infusion before night fell. If a fire was unavailable or too dangerous to light, the mere act of chewing certain leaves or roots gave travellers a sense of warmth blooming slowly inside the chest. You feel that imagined warmth now, a faint glow spreading through your rib cage during your steady breathing. A quietly peculiar detail whispered through a few camp stories suggests that some travellers tucked sprigs of certain warming herbs inside their collars or shirt fronts, believing the scent alone encouraged heat. Whether it was psychological or physiological does not matter in this moment. You imagine sliding a sprig of crushed sage into your coat, the aroma rising toward your face whenever you move. The air around you seems to steady, gaining a faint warmth shaped by memory and scent. You move deeper into the dark field, noting how the tips of the plants brush softly against your coat. A faint breeze stirs them, sending their dry fragrance upward. You begin to picture someone kneeling beside a saddlebag at dusk, sorting through bundles of herbs gathered earlier in the day, choosing which ones might ease the chill of the night ahead. Perhaps a strip of wild ginger root shaved with a small knife. Perhaps strands of dried mint tucked into a cloth pouch. These small comforts mattered more than anyone admitted. As you breathe in the cool air, the prairie seems to grow quieter. Out here, warmth grows from small rituals as much as from physical sources. The idea of an herbal warmth aid feels strangely companionable, a pocket of the earth's memory carried with you through the cold. Accounts differ sharply regarding which herbs actually produced meaningful warming effects. Some explorers praised wild ginger's stimulating quality, while others insisted the sensation was nothing more than a welcome distraction from the cold. The surviving descriptions leave the topic somewhat murky. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between. But as you walk beneath the wide night sky, the idea of holding a sliver of root between your teeth feels entirely believable as a source of comfort. You pause near another cluster of brush. In the dim light, their outlines blend together, and you imagine rummaging through them with practiced hands searching for the distinctive leaf shape or scent you were taught to recognize. Indigenous knowledge shaped much of this understanding. Many settlers learned from local tribes which plants eased cold hands, warmed aching joints, or soothed low body temperature. As you run your fingers through the imaginary leaves, you feel the weight of that shared wisdom. Another small memory preserved in a miner's notebook reveals that some workers chewed bitter prairie roots before descending into cold shafts, believing the sharp taste jolted their bodies into holding heat longer. You let the thoughts settle in your mind, imagining the harsh flavour on your tongue, the warmth rising faintly in response. As you continue walking, you imagine reaching into your coat pocket and pulling out a small pouch tied with rough twine. You open it and feel the dry, crumbling leaves inside. You rub a pinch between your fingers, letting the scent escape. It drifts upward, mixing with the cold. The wind softens for a moment as though acknowledging the offering. You bring the imaginary herbs to your lips, breathing in their sharp fragrance. The warmth you picture blooming in your chest is not intense but steady. It makes the cold less overwhelming. Your shoulders relax. Your steps soften. The prairie seems less hostile, more contemplative. You begin assembling an imagined blend in your mind. Sage for scent, mint for freshness, ginger for warmth. Each piece represents a different kind of comfort. You think of travellers carrying these small bundles wrapped in cloth inside saddlebags or coat pockets, pulling them out during moments like this, seeking heat from the earth rather than from flame. You pause and kneel once more, picking up an imagined root. The night presses close around you, but the small ritual of touching the plant, breathing its scent, brings an internal steadiness that feels almost tangible. You stand again, pocketing the root and continuing your walk. The wind returns, gliding along your cheek, but this time the cold does not bite quite so deeply. The warmth you carry inside your imagined lungs and bloodstream feels real enough to soften the air around you. You take another long breath. You taste the faint echo of herbs on your tongue. You feel the warmth flickering quietly behind your sternum, a private little ember. The prairie night stretches ahead, but you keep walking with steady steps, guided by the subtle bloom of warmth you borrowed from the plants of the land, their ancient remedies woven gently into your journey. You continue across the vast dark plain, until the wind shifts again, gaining a sharper edge that slips beneath your collar like a thin blade of ice. Your breath thickens into pale clouds, and every exhale feels as though it dissolves too quickly into the air. The cold no longer feels steady or predictable. Instead, it creeps and clings, searching for any hint of moisture clinging to your clothing. And that is when you begin to understand something crucial that every traveller in the 1800s West eventually learned: staying warm without a fire requires mastering the art of staying dry. Moisture, even the smallest drop, could turn a tolerable night into a dangerous one. You take a few more steps, and a memory of an imagined cold drizzle clings to your coat sleeve. In that instant, you can feel how quickly the warmth leaves your skin when fabric is damp. Descriptions passed down in various settlement logs emphasize that pioneers devoted constant attention to dryness, knowing that even sweat from walking too fast could freeze later, leashing heat from their bodies. You tighten your coat around your chest, instinctively adjusting your pace to mimic the slow, steady rhythm those travellers practiced. Warmth on nights like this depended less on muscle and more on restraint. The wind sweeps low across the ground, rustling blades of stiff grass. You imagine yourself stopping beside a small wash where a shallow puddle has frozen at the edges. The sight alone is enough to remind you that damp socks or gloves would be misery. You kneel and touch the edge of the puddle, letting the icy chill slip beneath your fingertips. Moisture cools the skin instantly, and once wetness reaches your inner layers, warmth drains away far faster than the cold air alone could manage. You rise again and take a few steps, feeling the cold tug at your cuffs. A little scrap of remembered practice hints that many frontier travellers stuffed dry grass inside their boots when their socks grew damp, using the grass to wick away moisture while adding a tiny bit of insulation. You imagine sliding grass into your own boots, feeling the roughness, but appreciating the drying effect as your toes regain some warmth. You walk along a gentle slope, the wind brushing steadily across your cheek. The prairie feels enormous, but dryness is a small, intimate battle, waged close to the skin. You imagine someone wringing moisture from their sleeves before nightfall, shaking out their coat to release snow or fog-soaked dampness. Perhaps they turn the garment inside out, letting the cold air dry it slowly while they walk. As you continue, you adjust your pace again, remembering not to overexert yourself. Sweat is a hidden enemy now, one you might not notice until it is too late. If your shirt grows damp beneath your coat, the cold will claim that moisture and turn it against you. Even a short burst of quick walking could lead to a chilling shiver an hour later. Interpretations pulled from the limited evidence vary greatly on which groups managed moisture control most effectively. Some researchers argue that indigenous communities familiar with the land's moods mastered these techniques far earlier and taught them to newcomers. Others suggest many settlers learned through painful trial and error, discovering the consequences of damp clothing only after a miserable night. The reality likely merges, both paths shaped by region, weather, and sheer luck. You reach down and pinch the fabric at your wrist, imagining testing for dampness. The cloth feels dry and relief settles into your chest. You picture tying spare fabric around your wrist to prevent snow or sleet from creeping inside. Travellers often carried small strips of cloth just for this purpose. A simple trick, but one that kept sleeves dry when wind drove shifting frost against their arms. You pause beneath a faint ridge and picture your coat being brushed by a thin layer of night fog. Even that slight moisture would need quick attention. You imagine shaking out your coat with deliberate movement, sending droplets scattering into the darkness before they can sink into the fabric. You picture rubbing the cloth between your palms to encourage evaporation. Your hands cold but determined. Another offhand detail found in a trapper's recollections comes to mind. He claimed that spreading a coat briefly over warm skin beneath clothing helped dry it faster, letting body heat do the work. It sounds uncomfortable, even chilly at first, but then you realize the logic. Body heat is a precious resource, and fabric warmed from within might dry better than fabric exposed to wind. You walk on, feeling your breath tighten slightly in the cold. Your skin tingles as the air tests every seam of your clothing. You slow your steps again, ensuring you do not sweat. You breathe through your nose, letting each exhale warm your scarf. Staying dry is a conversation between your body and the weather, a negotiation made in small adjustments. As you cross another shallow dip, you imagine preparing for sleep without fire. The first step would be checking your clothing for any sign of dampness. A small wet patch near the hem of your shirt could chill your stomach through the night. You imagine spreading your coat over a dry patch of grass, smoothing it flat to expose moisture to the open air. You would wait patiently, rubbing your arms, encouraging warmth, aware that the cold will only spare you if you honour its rules. The prairie wind softens for a moment. You take a slow breath, feeling the warmth inside your chest remain steady. You realise that mastering dryness has already eased your passage through the night. The cold no longer cuts as deeply. Your layers feel safer, more reliable. You walk forward again, steps quiet, breath slow, clothes dry. The cold is still here, but it cannot steal your warmth so easily now. You carry your protection within your choices, your careful pace, your dry layers. And with every step, the night grows just a little more manageable. You continue across the prairie until the land opens into a wide, pale stretch that glimmers faintly in the moonlight. At first, you think it is frost, but as you walk closer, the ground softens beneath your boots. Snow. Not deep, not heavy, but enough to blanket the earth in a powdery silence. The cold sharpens around you, and your breath escapes in steady ribbons of white. Snow usually means colder nights, harsher winds, and more danger. Yet out here in the west, some travellers learned that snow itself could become a refuge, not as a surface to avoid, but as a shelter to enter. You step into the shallow drifts, your boots sinking with a muted crunch. The air feels strangely still here, as if the snow absorbs sound the way wool absorbs heat. You take a few steps more, picturing how a frontier traveller might kneel down and begin digging, shaping a low arch or hollow within the drift. Reports from various winter expeditions suggest that snow, when compacted correctly, creates pockets of still air that insulate more effectively than many makeshift shelters. The idea feels counterintuitive, almost whimsical, until you feel how quiet the world becomes within these snowy folds. You crouch now, brushing your gloved fingers across the snow's surface. It glitters faintly under the stars, cold and crisp, yet malleable. You scoop away a handful, then another, imagining carving out a shallow nook inside a larger drift. The motion warms your arms. The snow crunches softly, yielding to your hands. You can almost hear the dull thump of each packed layer forming a wall. You shape the hollow in your mind, smoothing the interior so the roof stays firm. A faint but intriguing note from a few mountaineering journals claims that tilting the roof slightly allows warm breath to rise without dripping cold condensation onto the sleeper's face. You picture yourself doing this, pressing your palms upward to create a subtle angle that encourages moisture to drift toward the edges. Once inside, the wind disappears completely. The outside world becomes muffled, distant, softened into a gentle hush. You kneel in the dim space, letting your eyes adjust to the muted light filtering through the thin ceiling of snow. It glows faintly bluish and serene, as though the sky has been brought low to wrap around you. The temperature inside feels remarkably different from the open air. Not warm exactly, but stable. The kind of stability that keeps you alive. Interpretations drawn from surviving accounts vary on how frequently this method was used on the open plains. Some argue only trained trappers or winter scouts built such shelters, while others believe that ordinary travellers learned the technique through shared stories or desperation. The uneven documentation keeps the truth blurred, leaving space for the imagination to fill in the gaps. You sit back slightly, imagining that uncertain history settling around you like the snow itself. You shift your weight and imagine smoothing the interior walls with careful strokes, compacting them until they hold firm. The snow beneath you feels cold, but not as piercing as the wind you left behind. You think of how a traveller might spread a blanket or even dry grass across the floor before settling down. That thin layer would keep body heat from leaching into the ground too quickly. You breathe out softly, watching your exhale drift upward. Inside this imagined shelter, your breath becomes part of the insulation, warming the small space by a degree or two. The difference is subtle, but real. You feel your shoulders loosen. The cold no longer pulls at your ribs with every inhale. A quiet detail recalled from winter ranch stories surfaces in your mind. Some riders believe that building a small air vent near the entrance kept oxygen flowing and prevented the interior from becoming overly stuffy. You picture poking a tiny hole near the top of the drift, watching a soft wisp of warm breath slip through before cold air settles back in its place. The snow walls seem to listen to your movements, absorbing each sound. The wind above hums faintly, a distant reminder of the world outside. You imagine lying down now, curled into your bedroll inside the smooth hollow. The cold remains close, but no longer feels predatory. Your own heat begins to gather around you, warming the tiny space layer by layer. You run your hand along the snowy wall. It is firm, cold, but steady, holding your warmth inside with quiet patience. Snow which moments ago threatened your comfort now protects you. You marvel at how something so cold can preserve heat so effectively when shaped correctly. You crawl toward the entrance and peek out. The wind greets your face instantly, sharp and eager. It feels almost aggressive after the serenity inside. You pull back, savouring the shelter's calm, its soft quiet. It feels like stepping inside a frozen heartbeat. You eventually step out, brushing loose snow from your coat. The cold night rushes toward you again, but you now carry the memory of that still insulated world. The wind cannot intimidate you as easily. You take a slow breath, letting your lungs fill with sharp air, and begin walking once more across the frosted plains. Each step reminds you that even in winter's grip, the landscape holds small pockets of mercy. All you must do is learn to shape them, and with that thought you continue on beneath the pale, shimmering stars, steady and warm enough to face the night. You continue your slow journey across the prairie night until the land begins to change beneath your boots. The grass thins, replaced by a patch of bare ground that feels firmer, smoother, almost polished by countless footsteps before yours. The air grows sharper, pressing close along your sleeves. As you lift your collar, you notice the faint impression of something laid out long ago. A shape, a curve, a pattern. And you begin to imagine the kind of clothing that once moved across this very ground. Clothing shaped not by sewing machines or familiar stitching, but by instinct, tradition, and the quiet mastery of hide workers who understood how to hold warmth without letting a single thread betray them. Tonight you're thinking about seamless hide garments, the kind that kept heat close even on fireless nights. You stop and kneel, brushing your hand along the ground, as though tracing the outline of a buffalo or elk hide stretched across a frame. The picture in your mind grows vivid. Field notes from the time make it unmistakable that many indigenous communities crafted winter garments from hides, treated so carefully that the edges folded without harsh seams, reducing heat loss and minimizing cold drafts. You imagine slipping such a garment over your shoulders, now feeling its dense weight mold itself to your body like a second softer skin. You stand again and walk forward, letting the imagined hide fall along your arms. The texture is thick but pliable, the interior lined with warm fur, the exterior tough enough to resist wind. You feel the difference instantly. The cold no longer slices aggressively across your ribs. Instead, it collides along the hide's smooth surface and falls away. Even the subtle gaps near your neck feel sealed by the garment's natural shape. As you walk, a rarely noted improvisation appears in scattered reminiscences describing how some travellers soften stiff hide by working it against smooth stones or stretching it beneath their knees to create a more flexible fit. You picture yourself kneeling on the hide, now pressing it, coaxing it into supple folds that would wrap more tightly around the body. The movement warms your muscles, and the imagined hide seems to warm with you. You pull the garment tighter, adjusting it around your waist. The cold loosens its grip on your spine. Every step brings a faint ripple of warmth that settles across your chest. Seamless hides were not just garments, they were insulation systems created from generations of observation. Without hard seams, less heat escaped. The garment felt continuous, almost alive, responding to movement and breath. You pause at the edge of a faint ridge. The wind rises, briefly brushing the hide. The garment absorbs the gust, barely letting it touch your skin. You imagine how such clothing was shaped. No long stitches interrupting the surface. No rigid lines where cold air could slip inside. Just one piece of hide folded and tied with sinew in a way that made openings minimal and heat retention natural. The historical trail grows hazy when determining exactly how widespread these seamless garments became among different frontier groups. Some researchers believe settlers adopted them occasionally from indigenous neighbours, while others argue they remained primarily within native communities. The surviving evidence is too scattered and inconsistent to draw a solid boundary. You take a few more steps, accepting the uncertainty as part of the story, the way the prairie shadows blend without clear edges. You picture yourself stopping to examine the garment's inner fur. It is soft, warm, almost luminous in the moonlight. Long strands near the neck, shorter ones near the waist, all chosen with intention. You run your hand across it and warmth blooms beneath your palm. You understand why people treasured such garments. They did not simply keep out the cold, they invited warmth to linger. Another faint echo from trail folklore tells of travellers who placed warmed stones inside their hide garments before bed, letting the heat soak into the leather and fur so the warmth would last longer. You imagine slipping a stone into an inner pocket, feeling its warmth radiate through the hide onto your chest. The sensation makes you sigh softly into the night, momentarily forgetting the cold around you. You begin walking again, the imagined garment swaying gently with each step. It moves differently than cloth. Heavier, but also steadier, almost protective. The prairie wind continues testing you, sliding along the hide's smooth surface, failing each time to reach your inner layers. The garment feels fused with your motion, bending where you bend, creating warmth from movement and breath. You tilt your head upward, letting the stars reflect softly on the imagined fur. The night sky looks like a vast frozen river, and you feel small beneath it. But wrapped in the hide's thick warmth, you also feel capable of meeting the night on equal terms. No fire glows beside you. No cabin walls protect you. Just warmth shaped into clothing through skill and experience long before you ever stepped into this whispering landscape. You run your fingers along the garment's lower edge, imagining how it tucks inside your boots, sealing warmth near your legs. Even your feet feel less threatened by the chill, as though the hide's warmth has travelled all the way down to your toes. You picture yourself tightening a sinew belt, feeling the garment hug your torso more closely, trapping heat drawn from your own breathing. As you continue walking, the prairie stretches wide around you. The cold presses onward, but the hide holds firm, creating a pocket of stillness around your body. You breathe slowly, sensing warmth gathering with each inhale, staying with you on each exhale. You raise your collar one last time, letting the fur brush your cheek. The warmth it holds seems almost loyal. Then you lower your hand and keep walking, wrapped in the patient natural shelter of a garment shaped by the land itself. You walk deeper into the quiet plain where the darkness feels softer, and the wind glides low like a slow-moving river of cold air. The prairie stretches into gentle folds, and as you descend one of them, your boots brush against a patch of thin, flattened grass. You pause, feeling the night gather around you. The cold presses lightly, almost curiously, and a memory drifts into your thoughts of how warmth in the Old West sometimes came not from garments or earth or stone, but from how cloth wrapped the body itself. Tonight you feel yourself stepping into the world of nomadic blanket methods, techniques, shaped by centuries of movement, intuition, and precise folding. You crouch and touch the grass, imagining the outline of a traveller's blanket laid flat upon it. A thick weave, maybe wool, or a patterned trade blanket heavy enough to resist the wind. Several observers from the era repeatedly emphasize that many indigenous nations mastered the art of turning blankets into full-body cocoons, adjusting folds and tucks, so the cloth sealed warmth with remarkable efficiency. You imagine lifting such a blanket now, letting its weight settle across your hands before draping it over your shoulders. The first sensation is softness. The blanket feels dense but yielding, drawn close around your upper body. You shift slightly, letting the fabric mould itself to the curves of your chest. The night air slips past the outer surface, but inside the folds the warmth gathers quickly, forming a private pocket of comfort. You begin to walk again, adjusting the blanket as you move. A small offbeat memory tucked into a family chronicle mentions that some travellers wrapped the lower edges of their blankets around their legs, almost like a skirt tying them loosely, with a strip of cloth or rawhide. The method prevented warm air from spilling out at the knees while still allowing slow, steady movement. You pull the blanket inward now, imagining that enclosure forming around your legs, and you feel the cold lessen almost immediately. You pause near a cluster of low shrubs. The wind comes in a long sigh, brushing your shoulders. You tighten the blanket, pulling one corner across your chest, tucking it beneath your opposite arm. The world softens. Even without fire, warmth rises from you and stays within the fabric, refusing to drift away into the night. The available descriptions leave the matter unresolved when it comes to exactly how widespread these wrapping techniques were along the various migration routes. Some researchers believe they were common among traders and scouts who spent long nights under open skies. Others suggest they were used primarily within certain cultural groups and learned by outsiders only in moments of necessity. The surviving accounts do not align neatly, offering a picture that remains pleasantly blurred. You turn your head slightly and feel the edge of the blanket along your cheek. The fabric catches your breath warming quickly. You slip your hands beneath the layers, letting your palms pressed against your ribs. The warmth trapped between cloth and skin feels steady, almost alive. Another small detail hinted at in campfire recollections suggests that some travellers twisted one corner of the blanket into a makeshift hood, securing it with a knot behind the neck. You imagine doing this now, pulling the blanket upward to cover your head. The cold air around your ears fades instantly. Your breath settles into a slow rhythm, forming a soft cloud inside your improvised hood. You step forward again and notice how the blanket's folds move with you, creating a gentle, swaying warmth. The fabric holds your heat so closely that even the cold ground beneath your boots feels less threatening. Your steps become softer, more deliberate. Each movement stirs a faint breath of warmth upward from your chest toward your face. As you walk, you imagine other travellers using the same technique. A mother wrapping her child during a sudden winter gust. A scout bedding down without a fire, securing the edges beneath his legs to keep the warmth sealed inside. A group of riders gathered in a circle, their blankets wrapped tightly, sharing breath and warmth beneath the night sky. You stop for a moment and kneel, pulling the blanket fully around you until you become a single, softly rounded shape beneath it. The prairie wind brushes the outer surface, but inside you feel the warmth pooling along your spine, protected and patient. Your breath warms the inner fabric, creating a small glowing bubble of comfort. You lower your head and listen. The wind moves softly outside your cloth cocoon, but inside the world is calm. You remember how blankets were not just coverings in the frontier, they were tools, shelters, malleable pieces of warmth that travellers shape to fit the body, the weather, the moment. You rise slowly, keeping the blanket close, its folds swaying like a heavy cloak. The stars shimmer above, countless and cold, but your warmth stays with you. The prairie opens before you once again, and you walk into it with your blanket wrapped snugly around your form, carrying a small world of heat created by your own breath and careful folding. You keep moving through the quiet, frost-touched prairie until the land ahead glimmers with a thin gloss of moonlight. The cold feels heavier now, as though it has gathered weight with every hour of darkness. You exhale slowly, watching your breath drift away in a pale ribbon before dissolving. The wind brushes past your sleeves again, faint but persistent, always hunting for gaps. And as you adjust your coat, another unusual frontier survival method drifts into your thoughts, one that sounds strange to modern ears, but made perfect sense to those who battled winter without fire. Tonight you step into the gritty and oddly effective realm of clay and mud coatings. The idea seems counterintuitive at first. Smearing cold earth onto warm skin feels like an invitation to misery. But you pause near a shallow depression in the ground where a strip of exposed clay catches the moonlight, and you crouch to touch its surface. It feels cool but thick, just dense enough to hold shape. Materials preserved in early frontier archives indicate that some travellers pressed to extremes applied thin layers of mud or clay to expose skin as a barrier against biting winds. The coating sealed pores slowed evaporation and formed a crude but surprisingly resilient shield. You run your thumb across the clay, imagining lifting a small handful. The texture is smooth and heavy, leaving a faint ghost of cold across your skin. You picture a lone rider kneeling beside a creek's muddy bank, mixing soil with just enough moisture to create a soft paste, then spreading it along his cheeks or hands before crossing an exposed plateau. It was not comfortable, but warmth did not always come from comfort. You straighten, rubbing the clay between your fingers. A strangely inventive trick described in a single traveller's notebook mentions pressing bits of dried grass into the clay, so the layer became fibrous, more flexible, and less prone to cracking. You imagine doing that now, blending grass fibers into the mud with your palm before applying it. The mixture becomes pliable, almost like a primitive salve shaped by the land itself. You lift your hand toward your cheek, pretending to smear the clay along your jawline. The cold air feels different against it. The clay holds your skin's moisture close, preventing the wind from drawing heat away too quickly. Even the breeze brushing your face now seems less sharp, almost respectful of the barrier you have created. The historical picture remains indistinct around just how common this method was. Some researchers interpret these fragments of the evidence as proof of regular practice among isolated groups, while others caution that such methods were extremely situational, used only in dire weather or by those who lacked proper clothing. With so few detailed descriptions surviving, the truth sits somewhere in the grey spaces between certainty and speculation. You walk forward again, the imagined clay cooling slightly on your skin, but not unpleasantly. Once settled, the layer feels almost like a second coat, earthy and grounding. You take a deeper breath, letting the rhythmic cold fade into background noise. The clay's texture presses lightly against your cheek each time you turn your head, reminding you that survival in the West often required a willingness to look strange for the sake of warmth. You pause beneath a low rise where the wind picks up once more. It sweeps across your face, but the chill does not penetrate as easily. The clay, for all its oddness, softens the wind's edge. You imagine a group of travellers doing this together at dusk, kneeling by a slow-moving creek, quietly smearing clay onto their cheeks and foreheads. The image is both comical and touching, a moment of communal adaptation. Another small sliver of frontier memory hints that some families used clay around wrists and ankles before wrapping them in cloth, believing the combination trapped warmth better than cloth alone. You picture wrapping your wrists now first with a thin layer of clay, then binding them lightly with an imagined strip of fabric. The sensation seems oddly sturdy, as though you've reinforced your own joints against the cold. You walk onward, swinging your arms gently to test the imagined coating. The clay holds steady, cracking only slightly with movement, but never peeling away. As the wind shifts direction, your face feels protected, your ears less stung by the cold. You remember how mud and clay dry into a thin shell. Travellers who use this method likely tap the edges occasionally to loosen any flaking pieces, maintaining coverage where it mattered most. You reach up now and touch your cheek lightly, imagining brushing away a bit of loose clay while leaving the rest intact. The thin crust stays warm beneath your fingertips, warmed by your own skin. The prairie stretches around you, quiet and silver under the stars. You picture the clay-covered faces of travellers appearing ghost-like in the moonlight, pale masks shaped by necessity rather than ceremony. There is something humbling about the image. The land itself becomes both tool and companion, offering warmth in a form most would never expect. You pause again, letting the clay set in your imagination. As it firms, it becomes even more insulating. Your breath remains steady. Your steps grow slower, more deliberate. The night feels cold, yes, but not cruel. The strange barrier you carry continues to soften the wind's touch. You descend into another dip in the prairie. The air here is stiller, quieter, the ground more shaded. You crouch and touch the earth again, smearing a few more grains of clay across your fingers. The sensation brings a small smile, the kind that comes from discovering an old secret you never expected to need. You picture wiping your hands clean on a patch of dry grass, leaving faint streaks behind. Some streaks stay on your palms, forming thin lines of warmth that cling stubbornly to your skin. You rise and keep walking, the clay-coated skin on your face and hands absorbing the cold without surrendering to it. You imagine settlers, scouts and wanderers using this strange method, only when the night demanded it, when no fire could be lit and no heavy hide was available. Not glamorous, not elegant, but wonderfully effective in the quiet, practical logic of the frontier. As you lift your chin to the cold sky, the stars shimmer like small shards of ice. Yet beneath the clay-like barrier on your skin, your warmth holds steady, anchored by the land itself. You take another step, then another, walking deeper into the night with the earth's own armour pressed gently against you. You walk until the prairie narrows into a long, shallow corridor of wind that whistles past your ears with a rising insistence. The cold has teeth here gentler than a storm but sharp enough to remind you that every inch of exposed skin matters. You pull your collar higher, but the wind still brushes your forehead, slipping beneath the edge of your coat. That slight discomfort nudges your thoughts towards something quietly essential in the Old West headgear. Out here, warmth often started at the top, and the style of a hat could determine whether you endured the night comfortably or shivered through hours of creeping frost. You slow your pace and touch the rim of your imagined hat. Its crown feels firm beneath your palm, shaped by countless hands before you. One feature repeatedly mentioned in personal recollections is that travellers favoured hats with deep crowns and wide brims because they trapped rising body heat and shielded the face from gusts that stole warmth. You feel the truth of that now, as the wind blunts itself against your imaginary brim falling away instead of scouring your cheeks. As you continue walking, the cold shifts again. It slips past your temples lightly at first, then more boldly. You adjust your hat, angling the brim a little lower, and suddenly the wind becomes a background noise, a distant whisper, instead of a hungry presence. The change is immediate and soothing. You kneel beside a patch of stiff grass, letting your hand brush the frosted tips. The night is quiet, and a tiny, easily overlooked anecdote from family papers hints that some ranch hands line the inside of their hats with scraps of rabbit fur or soft wool to create an extra cushion of warmth. You imagine pressing such a lining inside your own hat, now feeling the soft layer cradle your forehead and ears. Immediately the cold dulls, replaced by a subtle growing warmth. You stand again, watching your breath float into the sky. The hat holds heat near your scalp, and that warmth drifts downward, softening the chill along your neck. You tilt your head slightly, noticing how the brim shields your ears from the wind. Even without a fire, the warmth building inside the crown becomes a quiet, comforting presence. You take another step, the wind swirling through the grass. Your hat feels heavier now, warmed by your own body. You imagine someone on the frontier tightening a chin strap or tying a strip of cloth beneath their jaw to keep their hat secure during a cold night atop a ridge. The movement in your mind feels familiar, instinctive. Historical interpretations diverge when examining how many settlers deliberately modified their hats for cold weather versus simply using whatever they owned. Some believe hat customization was widespread and intentional, while others argue it was a rare habit practiced mainly by experienced riders or trappers. The written evidence does not settle the matter cleanly, leaving you to stand in the middle of the night imagining all the possibilities. You adjust your imaginary hat again. The wind shifts direction, glancing off the brim and falling away. You feel a subtle warmth gathering near the top of your head, the kind that seeps downward over time. You inhale deeply the crisp air filling your lungs, and you realize how much comfort a simple hat can bring to a night like this. You walk past a low ridge where the land funnels the wind into a narrow, steady stream. You feel it surge toward you, rushing like a cold tide. Instinctively, you lower your head and let your hat take the brunt of it. The brim splits the gust, sending half downward toward the ground and the other half up toward the open sky. Your face remains warm enough, protected by a shape designed not just for sun or rain, but for the invisible currents of night air. You pause for a moment, imagining the kinds of hats that once moved through this land. Felt hats heavy and dense, fur caps lined with thick skins, hooded wraps that pulled over the back of the neck. Information preserved in old correspondence suggests that some hunters stitched small ear flaps along the sides of their hats, folding them upward during the day and lowering them at night. You reach up now and picture lowering an imaginary flap, feeling it settle gently against your ear like a warm hand. The prairie wind grows softer again. You walk onward and the hat warms further with each step. It becomes a companion, a miniature shelter perched on your head. You feel the warmth pooling near your scalp, radiating slowly outward. The air at your neck feels less cold. Your shoulders relax. You stop near a small outcropping of stone and sit for a moment, letting the night settle. You lower your hat slightly, feeling the rim shield your eyes from the sharp glare of moonlit snow. The wind tries to curl beneath the brim again, but the thick crown holds your heat steady. You draw your coat tighter around your shoulders, A strangely specific improvisation appears in the margin of an old diary describing how some travellers stuffed loose straw into the crown of their hats for additional insulation when temperatures dropped sharply. You imagine tucking a handful inside, feeling the prickly texture against your fingertips, before settling into a surprisingly soft cushion around your head. You smile at the practicality of it, the frontier's way of turning even roadside debris into survival tools. You walk again, the hat feeling heavier with imagined straw but also warmer. The wind brushes your cheek, but the warmth from your scalp flows downward. Even your face feels slightly shielded by the brim's protective curve. You lift a hand to the crown, pressing it gently. The hat responds with a firm, comforting shape. You tilt it forward, feeling the warmth deepen. As you continue your slow path across the prairie, you realize that warmth here comes in layers. Not just layers of clothing, but layers of technique, layers of instinct, layers of listening to what the land allows. A hat may seem simple, but on a night like this it becomes a guardian of heat, a quiet fortress perched above your eyes. You breathe deeply once more. The warmth at the top of your head holds steady. The wind glides harmlessly past you. You take another step into the darkness, carrying that small, steady glow of comfort as you continue walking beneath the pale and endless sky. You keep walking through the cold, open darkness until the land begins to rise in a slow, gentle swell beneath your feet. Your breath flickers in pale clouds and the night air grows thinner, sharper, almost metallic against your tongue. Your stomach gives a small hollow twist, and suddenly you remember something that every traveller in the 1800s West knew. Instinctively, warmth is not only something you wear, it is something you eat. Out here, far from the comfort of a kitchen or a steady fire, the right food could keep your body glowing from the inside like a quiet lantern. You stop beside a cluster of dark, wind-swept shrubs, kneeling to rest your hands on your thighs. The cold presses more firmly now, climbing your arms in slow, deliberate steps. You inhale steadily, and with that breath comes the memory of food carried in saddlebags, pockets, and cloth bundles tied to belts. Descriptions by early travellers frequently highlight that hearty, slow-burning foods helped maintain inner heat for hours at a time. Not fancy meals, not steaming plates, just dense, simple nourishment designed for longevity. You imagine digging into a small leather pouch at your hip and pulling out something familiar from Frontier Stories' dried meat. Jerky. Dense, salty, slow to chew. As you imagine taking a bite, your jaw moves in the dark and the cold around your face seems to flatten, becoming less aggressive. Your body remembers the sensation of protein breaking down into long-lasting energy. Even in imagination, the food warms your core. You rise again, take a few steps, and think of something else tucked into a traveller's pack. Hard biscuits or small pouches of oats. Foods that release energy slowly. A curious sliver of remembered camp lore mentions that some riders kept lump sugar tucked into their coats, not for sweetness alone, but because a small piece dissolved on the tongue could spark enough warmth to steady the spirit during long cold hours. You imagine the sugar melting now, sending a faint rush of heat down your throat. You continue walking, feeling the imagined food settle inside your chest like a warm ember. The wind pushes at your sleeves, but you push back with your breath steadied by the sense of fuel in your system. The cold can take heat quickly, but it cannot steal what is constantly being replenished. You reach a shallow rise and picture sitting down to share a small meal with fellow travellers. Perhaps beans cooked earlier in the day and wrapped tightly in cloth to retain some warmth. Perhaps a piece of dense cornbread or a handful of roasted nuts. Each bite would feel like a conversation with your own body, telling it to stay awake, stay alert, stay warm. You can almost hear the quiet chewing, the murmured words, the soft exhale of breath fogging the air. Yet accounts conflict too strongly to create a clear picture of which foods were considered the most effective at generating warmth. Some frontier families swore by fatty cuts of meat, claiming that rich oils heated the body from within. Others insisted grains did the real work, offering steady endurance over sudden bursts of heat. The remnants of diaries, letters, and cookbooks offer too many contradictions to shape a single rule. Still, one truth remains. Food kept people alive when fire could not. You begin to imagine a bowl of thick, cooled stew eaten at dusk. Not hot, just room temperature. Even without heat, your muscles remember the density, the weight, the way such a meal anchors you. You feel your shoulders relax, your ribs expand. Your body warms itself simply because it has something to burn. You picture chewing on a piece of dried fruit, the sweetness bright against the cold air. Your imagined breath deepens. That tiny burst of natural sugar trickles warmth down your arms and legs. You picture someone else doing the same while wrapped in a bedroll, eaten slowly to let the warmth stretch across the longest hours of the night. You walk again, taking slow, purposeful steps. The cold tries to press inside your coat, but your breathing stays steady, fueled by an imagined fullness. You can feel the difference inside your core. Food warms from the center outward, spreading through the bloodstream with the quiet persistence of rising dawn. Another unconventional trick whispered in trail recollections involves swallowing small sips of cold grease. It sounds unappetizing now, but travelers believe the dense fat coated the stomach and kindled warmth, far longer than other foods. You imagine taking a small swallow, your body responding with a slow radiating heat that gathers in your chest before drifting outward. You let the imagined warmth move through you. It fills your hands, softens the chill beneath your coat, makes the edges of the wind less sharp. Your steps feel surer, steadier. The prairie no longer feels like an empty freeze. It becomes a place where your body knows exactly what to do given the right fuel. You pause atop a small ridge. The stars above shimmer like tiny shards of ice, yet inside your chest a steady glow persists. You breathe into it, your breath forming a gentle cloud that rises toward the sky. You place your hand against your stomach, feeling the imagined warmth held there. Food is not flashy, it does not light up the night, but it becomes the heat you carry, the warmth you forge with each slow chew and swallow. And with that warmth, you take your next step into the vast and patient darkness, the prairie shifting quietly beneath your feet as you continue onward. You move onward across the prairie until the night begins to feel almost liquid around you, flowing past your coat in long chilled currents. The stars gleam like thin needles of light, and each inhale prickles the inside of your chest. The cold is not vicious now, only patient, waiting for you to slow down to stop generating your own heat. And that is when your mind settles on one of the simplest but most underestimated methods people used to stay warm in the Old West movement. Not frantic shivering, not desperate stomping, just gentle, deliberate motion paced to keep warmth kindled without calling sweat to the surface. You let your shoulders rise and fall with a slow breath, and you take a few steps at an even rhythm. The cold brushes your arms, but warmth begins to bloom along your ribs. Information preserved in early journals written by winter travelers suggests that people quickly learn to move in measured cycles, lifting arms, flexing fingers, shifting weight, all without breaking into exertion. Too much motion overheated the body and dampened clothing with sweat. Too little allowed cold to settle in the joints. You feel the balance settling into your limbs now, somewhere between stillness and momentum. You walk a bit further and begin to imagine how a frontier traveller might quietly exercise their fingers inside mittens. You curl and uncurl your hand, feeling an immediate shimmer of warmth return to your knuckles. Your boots shift against the frozen earth, and you roll your shoulders once, letting the tension fade. It takes only a little motion to persuade your blood to gather warmth again. As you continue, a faint and unusual account from a weathered cattle hand notebook comes to mind. It describes riders who gently swung their elbows in small circles under their coats to stir warm air around the torso without letting cold rush in. You mimic the movement now, small and subtle, and the warmth gathers at your chest like a soft ember enlivened by a breath of air. The wind moves around you in a long sigh, brushing the grass in quiet waves. You inhale slowly, then stretch your neck to one side. The motion releases a faint warmth near your jaw and throat. In the distance, a faint shape of a tree stump stands against the moon, and you walk toward it, letting your feet fall lightly each step, a reminder of the importance of steady rhythm. You reach the stump and rest your hand on its frost-coated surface. The cold nudges your wrist, and you pull your hand back into your sleeve, wiggling your fingers until the warmth returns. Accounts conflict too much to draw a straightforward picture of how frequently people relied on these micro-movements, but many period writings mention them casually nestled between stories of the trail and notes about the weather. Some travellers described bending their knees slowly inside blankets. Others wrote of shifting weight back and forth to keep the lower back warm. The small motions were rarely the focus of their accounts, but their presence whispers how vital they were. You take a slow step back from the stump and begin moving again, this time making your stride longer then shorter, letting your core stay warm without pushing into effort. A few paces later you pause and gently twist your torso, feeling heat unfurl beneath your coat. The twist is quiet, controlled, the kind of movement that would not stir attention from sleeping companions, but would shield you from a freezing night. You continue onward, flexing your toes inside your boots. The pressure warms your soles, reminding you that even the ground beneath you responds differently when your muscles stay awake. You imagine a lone rider doing the same in the middle of a wide plain, adjusting posture, shifting weight in the saddle, keeping their core warm without ever breaking into sweat. A faint rumour that circulated among wagon crews claimed that some travellers hummed while walking, believing the gentle vibration warmed their throats and chests. You try humming softly now, feeling the vibration slip through your sternum. The effect is subtle, but pleasant, like a tiny pulse of warmth radiating outward. You stop again, and roll your shoulders back then forward, letting the motion create small waves of heat along your spine. The prairie night feels less hostile now, not because the temperature has changed, but because your body is responding to it with deliberate cooperation. Movement here is not exercise. It is conversation. You begin walking once more, maintaining the balanced rhythm that frontier travellers learned from experience rather than instruction. Too much effort and cold sweat would cling to your back. Too little, and your fingertips would fade into numbness. But this middle ground, this gentle continual motion becomes a portable fire, one your body tends without flame. You take another long breath and stretch your arms inside your coat, feeling warm air shift from your torso to your upper arms. You close your fists, open them again, and feel the warmth gather behind your knuckles. The cold at your cheeks remains sharp, but your core stays steady bright with its own internal heat. Below the stars you walk on shifting, bending, flexing, coaxing warmth from movement, as countless travellers did before you, turning small gestures into heat and heat into endurance. The prairie expands around you in patient silence, but you move through it with warmth alive beneath your ribs. Each deliberate step carries your body's quiet fire forward, guiding you through the dark. You move across a darker stretch of prairie now, where the grass lies low and the wind carries the faint scent of old trails. Your boots sink softly into packed soil, and somewhere far off a lone cowbell rings with a muffled tone, as if the night itself has swallowed most of the sound. That distant echo draws your thoughts toward the great cattle drives of the 1800s, when riders spent weeks under open skies sleeping on bare ground, with no fire allowed. Not because they lacked wood, but because flame could spook a restless herd or signal unwanted attention. Tonight you feel yourself stepping into the quiet world of trail rider warmth, tricks the subtle methods used by men who slept within reach of thousands of hooves. A faint gust pushes against your coat and you tighten it instinctively. Surviving trail diaries remark in passing that seasoned drovers chose sleeping spots with remarkable care, often positioning themselves on the leeward side of the herd, where the animal's mass blocked the coldest wind. You imagine stepping into that warm pocket now, letting the bulk of invisible longhorn bodies shield you from the night's bite. Even without fire, the difference is noticeable. You take a breath and feel the cold soften against your chest. You crouch beside a patch of trampled grass, running your fingers through the flattened blades. The ground here seems warmer than the exposed soil just behind you. The herd's movement would have stirred the earth, releasing a bit of trapped heat. You press your palm lightly into the ground, imagining the faint warmth pulsing upward. As you stand again, a peculiar little method mentioned quietly in a cowboy's trail notebook slips into your memory. He wrote of placing a folded saddle blanket directly over his stomach before curling into his bedroll. According to his remark, the extra weight trapped his core heat more effectively, allowing the rest of his body to stay warm without overexertion. You picture placing the heavy blanket across your abdomen, now feeling the gentle pressure holding your warmth in place. The cold around you feels noticeably less intrusive. You walk farther, hearing the phantom echo of cattle shifting in the dark. Their bodies would have generated heat in great waves, subtle but constant. A rider sleeping close enough could feel that warmth drift across the air like a quiet breath, especially when the wind softened for a moment. You imagine lying on your side, back turned toward the imaginary herd, letting the warm air settle along your spine. The night no longer feels quite so sharp. You pause, letting the wind slip past your coat. Reports from the time disagree too much to form a single story about how often riders shared blankets or huddled together, but the inconsistencies suggest a flexible approach shaped by weather and necessity. Some accounts describe riders sleeping shoulder to shoulder, sharing heat when the temperature plunged. Others insist such closeness was rare and reserved only for emergency nights. You accept the ambiguity as part of the landscape, just as shifting winds belong to the prairie. You shift your weight and imagine a bedroll laid out on the ground, a saddle blanket beneath, another on top, perhaps a coat draped across your feet. You settle into the picture, feeling the cold earth beneath your shoulders and the weight of fabric above you. With cattle nearby, the air's bite dulls. Their warmth mixes with yours until the night becomes a little more forgiving. You walk again, adjusting your imaginary scarf around your neck. As you do, you recall how some drovers use their saddles as partial windbreaks. The heavy leather and curved shape could block gusts from striking a sleeper's chest or face. You imagine propping your saddle near your head now, letting the wind shift around it in softened waves. The air brushing your cheek becomes bearable, almost gentle. The prairie stretches ahead, wide and open. You stride forward, imagining the soft clatter of horns in the dark, the deep breathing of the cattle forming a slow rhythm that warms the night. The herd becomes an enormous living barrier, a moving wall that takes the brunt of winter's touch. Another subtle recollection surfaces from an old ranch foreman's letters. Riders sometimes tucked their hands beneath the horse blankets, thrown over saddles, using the thick wool to keep their fingers warm before sleep. You try this in your imagination, now sliding your hands beneath a warm fabric. The warmth blossoms, quickly tingling at the fingertips before spreading across your palms. You take another long breath. The wind hums around you in low tones, but with each remembered trick, the cold loses another inch of ground. Your body feels warmer, your steps steadier. You picture curling into your bedroll one last time, the sounds of cattle murmuring around you, the weight of your coat keeping you warm without flame. The prairie may be vast and unforgiving, but those who lived on it learned to borrow warmth from movement, from animals, from cloth, and from the land itself. Tonight you carry those lessons with you as you continue along the quiet trail, your breath steady and your warmth held close beneath the long dark sky. You cross a stretch of prairie where the land begins to harden under your feet, the soil turning stony and uneven. The air grows colder as you walk, carrying the faint dry scent of dust settling after a long day. Ahead, the horizon dips into a narrow valley, and in that faint hollow you begin to imagine a place that once buzzed with noise and labour, a mining camp. Not the lively firelit version shown in stories, but the cold nighttime reality, where men often slept without flame for fear of consuming precious fuel or drawing attention to themselves. The ground here feels different under your boots, as if echoing the weight of those old footsteps. You step down into the shallow valley and a chill glides up your back. Notes recorded by long-range riders indicate that miners relied on the natural warmth of the earth itself, gathering deep inside shafts or hugging the sides of embankments to conserve heat. You run your hand along an imagined stone outcrop, feeling the cool but steady texture beneath your fingers. Even in the cold, the rock holds a muted, unwavering temperature that feels strangely reassuring. You breathe out, watching your breath drift into the dark. Below you, the valley dips into a shape that suggests the entrance to a shaft. You walk toward it slowly, letting your coat brush against the rough stone. Inside this imagined space, warmth is not something created. It is something preserved. You pause at the mouth of the shaft, noticing how the air within feels still calmer, even slightly warmer than the wind outside. You step inside. The darkness settles around you, thick but gentle. The walls feel close and the cold loses some of its bite. A small, half-forgotten memory from a ranch ledger recounts that miners sometimes slept with their backs pressed against damp shaft walls, claiming the stone prevented sudden drops in temperature that came with sleeping in open air. You lean your back against the imagined rock, now feeling its faint steadiness against your shoulders. The contact is cool, but it does not steal your warmth. Instead, it anchors it. You take a slow breath as the stone presses gently into your spine. The quiet inside the shaft is absolute. No wind, no distant howls, just muffled silence. You tuck your hands beneath your coat, flexing your fingers until they warm. The darkness enhances the sense of insulation as though the earth folds around you in a protective gesture. You begin to walk deeper into the shaft, imagining the crunch of gravel beneath your boots. Reports from the time disagree about how comfortable these subterranean rests truly were. Some miners described them as life-saving shelters that kept them from freezing during winter nights. Others insisted the dampness made them miserable, leaving them cold and stiff by morning. With accounts so mismatched no clean truth emerges, you embrace the ambiguity as you step lightly across the uneven ground. You find a flat rock and sit pulling your coat around your knees. The shaft air feels thick, neither warm nor cold, just steady. In a place where stability is rare, that steadiness becomes its own kind of comfort. You picture miners doing the same, curling against rock walls, using spare clothing as padding, conserving each breath of body heat. You shift your shoulders, letting the imagined warmth settle beneath your coat. A faint echo from camp chatter suggests that some miners place their boots beneath their shirts or blankets while sleeping underground, using body heat to keep the leather from stiffening in the cold. You mimic the motion now, imagining tucking your boots under your coat. The thought brings a brief smile as warmth trickles into your hands. You stand again, running your fingertips along the stone surface. The wall feels cool, but patient, as if unaffected by the chill outside. The steadiness wraps around you like a muted hum. The night may roar across the plains, but deep in these imagined shafts the cold loses its teeth. As you make your way toward the entrance, you notice a small hollow along the wall where a miner might have rested his tools. You picture someone placing their pick or shovel there before settling down, using the small alcove as a makeshift pillow to keep cold metal from leaching heat from their skin. You imagine lying down beside the wall, your breath forming small clouds that vanish in the still air. You take one final step into the deeper section of the shaft, letting the stone close around you. The cold softens into a quiet, persistent presence. Your own warmth gathers slowly, forming a gentle halo around your chest and arms. You sit again, breathing evenly, feeling the earth's slow rhythm beneath your spine. Eventually you rise and walk back toward the entrance. The wind greets you instantly, brushing your cheeks with renewed sharpness. But you carry the steadiness of the shaft with you now. You wrap your coat tighter, step into the open air and continue onward. The prairie stretches out before you in deep starlit shadows, but your warmth holds steady, shaped by stone darkness and the ancient patience of the earth beneath your feet. You climb out of the stony hollow and return to the open prairie where the wind has softened into a slow drift, brushing your coat like a cool hand. The sky above seems bigger now, scattered with faint stars stretching toward the horizon. As you walk, the cold settles differently, no longer fierce but persistent the way it often felt around isolated homesteads of the 1800s. And with that sensation comes a gentle pull toward another source of warmth, used by countless frontier families, especially by the women who managed cabins, children chores and nightly rituals long after the sun slipped away. These were quiet warmth skills fashioned from routine and resourcefulness, learned through necessity rather than choice. You imagine yourself approaching a small sod cabin, its shape low to the ground, smoke absent because tonight fire is too precious to burn. The door creaks softly under your hand and you step inside, feeling your body sink into the muted warmth stored within the walls. Descriptions in household correspondence from the period often underline how frontier women relied on layered bedding, tightly woven quilts, and strategic sleeping arrangements to trap whatever warmth the family produced. You picture one such quilt, now heavy with stitched patterns draped across a narrow bedstead. You run your palm along the imagined fabric. It feels thick, almost velvety from years of wear. The weight alone promises warmth, as if every line of thread carries the memory of 100 cold nights. You lift a corner, feeling how the layers catch the air and hold it close. Your breath softens instantly. As you move deeper inside the cabin, you notice narrow windows stuffed with fabric to block drafts. The floor is swept clean with rugs placed strategically in corners. A tiny, nearly overlooked notation in a settler's journal mentions that women often tucked warm stones inside cloth bundles at dusk and slipped them between bedding layers before sleep, letting the remaining heat linger under quilts. You imagine lifting such a bundle now, feeling the lingering warmth seep into your palm before tucking it beneath the imagined sheets. You kneel near the bed and picture a mother smoothing the blankets, making sure no cold air could slip between layers. She would have learned to shake quilts vigorously each evening, trapping fresh air between the folds, which created a cushioned pocket of warmth. You try the motion in your mind now, and even in imagination the air beneath the quilt grows gentler. The full truth is cloudy, since contemporary descriptions don't quite line up about how common multi-layer sleeping arrangements were. Some letters describe families stacking as many as 6 quilts on a single bed. Others mention sleeping under only 2 heavy layers while relying on warm clothes beneath. The inconsistencies speak to unique households, different climates, and varying access to materials. No single story fits all. You stand and walk toward the corner of the imagined cabin where clothing hangs from wooden pegs. Shawls, skirts, aprons, coats. Thick layers of cloth infused with the faint scent of smoke from past fires. You brush your fingers across one shawl, imagining how women wrapped them tightly around their torsos before bed, binding warmth close to the skin. The fabric feels soft and worn, shaped by years of use. Your gaze shifts toward the hearth. Cold tonight. But near it you see the faint outline of iron warming pans once filled with coals on nights when fire was allowed. Even when empty, these tools were sometimes used as insulation, filled with baked grain or heated sand during the day, then placed beneath bedding at night. You picture placing one beneath your imagined blanket, now feeling the gentle warmth radiate upward. You take a few steps toward the far wall where dried herbs hang from rafters. Some were meant for cooking, others for comfort. You imagine frontier women brewing teas earlier in the day using mint willow bark or rose hips, the warmth lingering in the body long after the sun fell. Even without fire at night, that warmed feeling carried through the cold hours. You sit near the doorway and listen to the quiet rhythm of the cabin. Wind moves outside like a soft murmur, but in here the air feels steadier, held together by routines rather than heat. Women often placed extra cloth at thresholds, pressed rags into cracks between floorboards, or laid heavy skirts across laps to conserve warmth, while mending or reading. You imagine tucking cloth around your ankles now, feeling warmth settle as the cabin shields you. A barely noticed habit captured in a ranch hand letter describes wives and daughters warming their hands beneath their petticoats while working at night, letting body heat collect beneath the fabric. You try the idea in your mind, tucking your hands into an imagined fold of cloth, and warmth blooms swiftly around your fingers. You rise and approach the bed once more. The quilt feels heavier somehow, as if the air inside it has thickened with warmth. You slide beneath it and imagine the weight settling along your shoulders. The cold remains, but the layers soften it until it feels far away. You close your eyes, briefly breathing into the quilt, letting the air grow warmer with each inhale. You imagine the quiet hum of a frontier night, the rustle of quilts, the soft breathing of children sleeping nearby, the distant sigh of the wind outside. Eventually you stand and step out of the cabin, carrying that deep-layered warmth with you into the prairie darkness. The night greets you again, cool and patient, but the warmth forged inside those thick handmade layers lingers beneath your coat as you continue onward. You walk deeper into the prairie night, the cold settling into a quiet certainty around you. The grass glimmers faintly in the starlight, brittle under your boots, each step sounding like a small whisper beneath the sky. As you move, you feel a softness tug at your memory, something gentler than the rough edge of survival. It reminds you of the frontier children who carved warmth from play motion and mischief even on the iciest nights. Their laughter did not change the temperature, but it changed the body, and warmth in the west often came from unexpected places. You crest a low rise and the land widens before you in a gentle arc. You imagine a small clearing where children once gathered bundled in thick clothes, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. Letters from the era quietly specify that frontier families encouraged simple evening games because running, bending, rolling, and quick motions helped stir the blood before bedtime. You can almost see the children now, darting in shadows, the soft glow of dusk still lingering behind them. You pause and picture a group racing in small loops, their boots crunching across packed earth. You take a few steps yourself, mimicking their playful pace, and instantly feel warmth blooming in your chest. It is a soft, rising heat, the kind that spreads naturally without risking sweat. You smile faintly at the thought. As you continue walking, you imagine a simple game of tag unfolding on the frontier. Children would stretch their arms, wiggle cold fingers, then burst into short sprints, stopping quickly so they didn't overheat. One fragment of dusty folklore alludes to something sweetly odd. Some children rubbed their mittens together rapidly before play, believing the friction summoned luck and warmth at the same time. The image makes you chuckle under your breath. You try rubbing your own imaginary mittens, now feeling a faint tingle return to your fingertips. The wind brushes your face again, and you tuck your chin into your collar. In your mind, the children respond differently. They whirl in circles to capture the breeze, and turn it into a moment of exhilaration rather than discomfort. You imagine joining them, turning once, twice, feeling your coat flare slightly, and the air swirl around you. The cold feels playful rather than hostile. You continue your imaginary walk among them, hearing the soft thuds of small boots on frozen grass. Some children hop from one foot to the other, warming their toes in rhythmic motions. Others kneel to gather handfuls of loose grass and toss it into the air, laughing as it drifts like pale confetti in the moonlight. Recorded accounts diverge enough that no firm pattern emerges regarding which games were most popular for warming up before bed. Some families played quiet guessing games that required steady movement of hands and feet. Others told lively stories accompanied by gestures acting out animals or heroes in large sweeping motions. The details differ from journal to journal, but the shared conclusion echoes clearly. A few minutes of play softened the night's chill. You walk a bit faster, letting the imagined children run ahead. Their laughter merges with the faint sigh of prairie wind. You picture one child bending low to the ground, scooping up a handful of snow, then bouncing upright as though the cold itself dared him to stay lively. The movement starts a chain reaction, others jump, twirl, stretch, and suddenly the whole group glows with warm energy. You pause near a fallen log, imagining children balancing along its length arms stretched out to steady themselves. The balancing act forces them to shift their muscles, warming calves, knees, and core. You step onto the imagined log yourself, feeling its rough texture under your boots. As you extend your arms, warmth gathers in your shoulders. You move carefully, pretending the log wobbles beneath you. When you hop down again, your heart beats a little faster, driving warmth throughout your body. Another unconventional little practice emerges in a single camp recollection. Children sometimes tucked warm pebbles into their pockets after holding them near the hearth earlier in the day. Even hours later, those pebbles held enough gentle heat to warm small fingers. You imagine placing one in your own pocket, now feeling a tiny pulse of warmth against your palm. You wander farther, letting the ghostly outlines of children run around you. Their footsteps seem to echo soft and fleeting. You picture an older sibling guiding younger ones through stretches, arms, overhead knees, bending spines, arching like sleepy cat's motions designed to coax heat into stiff limbs without tiring them out. You mimic the stretches, slowly feeling the pull of muscles adjusting under your coat. The warmth deepens. You inhale, savouring the cold air sliding into your lungs. As you exhale, you imagine your breath mixing with theirs, tiny clouds rising into the night. Their little hands keep moving, brushing snow off sleeves, patting their coats, clapping softly to warm palms. A subtle oddity mentioned in a forgotten notebook describes children pressing both hands against their cheeks, then against their necks, pretending they were checking for fevers, but in reality they were warming their fingers at the hottest points of the body. You try it now, resting your hands against your throat. The warmth that gathers there spreads into your palms instantly. You continue walking, imagining how these children eventually grew tired movements, slowing warmth settling deep. Their parents would call them inside or into a tent, each child glowing with the kind of heat only laughter and motion could build. You picture the quiet transition, the running stops, the breathing slows, the cold becomes soft rather than sharp. You let yourself drift into that gentler warmth. Your shoulders feel looser, your hands warmer, your steps steadier. The children fade gradually into the night, their echoes softening as the prairie settles. You breathe in once more, then exhale slowly, letting your own warmth rise from motion rather than fire. The landscape stretches around you, vast and patient, but you carry with you the echo of frontier children who found warmth through play, imagination, and instinct. You continue on, feeling lighter, steadier, the warmth alive beneath your coat as the quiet prairie unfolds ahead. You walk onward until the prairie begins to slope into a shallow bowl, the air colder here but strangely quieter. Your boots press into soft earth, and the wind loses some of its sharpness as the land curves gently around you. You pause near the centre of the hollow, sensing how the shape of the ground itself offers a kind of shelter. And then your thoughts drift toward the quiet ways frontier families and travellers guarded their warmth through shared closeness. Not crowds, not huddling in fear. Just the simple, deeply human act of using shared body heat to keep the night from claiming too much. Warmth in the West could come from company as much as from clothing or cleverness. You exhale slowly and picture a group settling around you, family travelling companions, friends who had walked long distances through bitter air. A detail tucked into early settlement paperwork reveals that families often slept close to one another during frigid nights, arranging their bodies in deliberate patterns to conserve warmth. Parents placed children between them. Older siblings curled behind younger ones. Travellers arranged themselves back to share heat, without exposing faces to wind. You imagine yourself stepping into such a formation now, letting warmth rise from both sides like the steady glow of banked coals. You kneel and brush your fingers over the ground. The earth feels cold, but it is familiar, dependable. You picture spreading several blankets or coats here, creating a shared bed, where warmth from each person mingles with the next. You sit in the imagined circle, letting shoulders touch gently, and the night's chill softens in a way no single blanket could match. You take a slow breath, thinking of something subtle and rarely mentioned outside old letters, how people often synchronize their breathing at night, whether consciously or not. One faint thread of frontier storytelling claims that matching breaths made warmth spread more evenly, creating a shared rhythm that eased shivers and soothed anxious hearts. You inhale, then exhale with an even tempo, feeling how your chest warms the air beneath your coat. You shift your weight and imagine leaning gently against someone's back, letting their warmth press through layers of cloth. The sensation is immediate and comforting. The cold no longer presses so deeply into your ribs. It feels slower, less determined, held at bay by connection rather than strategy. You walk a few steps to the far edge of the hollow and picture a different arrangement, travellers lying in a long row beneath a shared quilt, each person's warmth reinforcing the next. Several 19th century field reports point out that groups on cattle drives or wagon trains sometimes shared coverings layered in alternating directions to prevent drafts from sneaking in. You can almost feel it now, a heavy quilt pulled tightly across shoulders, while another layer seals warmth near your feet. You crouch again, imagining children curling against parents, their tiny hands tucked beneath sleeves or tucked under adult arms. You picture someone draping an extra coat over the group's backs, not worn, but laid across everyone like a wide, warm wing. Motion slows, breath settles, warmth builds. The surviving notes present an uneven picture of how common these arrangements were. Some sources describe them as nightly routines, while others frame them as solutions for only the most severe cold. The truth likely lives in both places, shaped by weather supplies and the people themselves. You accept the uncertainty easily, it fits the shifting quiet of the prairie around you. As you stand, you imagine a traveller leaning close enough to share breath warmth during a freezing night. Not touching faces, but simply allowing the small pocket of warm air between them to soften the cold. You can almost feel that space now, a gentle warmth, drifting upward each time you exhale. You begin walking again, and as you do, you picture someone linking arms with you to keep both of you steady and warm. The landscape feels less lonely when imagined bodies gather, forming a small constellation of warmth in the dark. You move as part of a group now, each step echoing the presence of unseen companions. You stop briefly beneath a cluster of starlight, pulling your coat tighter. The imagined warmth still lingers along your sides and across your back. You sense how profoundly human warmth once shaped survival, how vital those shared breaths, linked arms and overlapping blankets could be. You lower yourself to the ground once more, imagining lying between two companions for the night. One rests their back against yours, the other curls lightly in front. The arrangement feels natural, comforting in its simplicity. With shared warmth, the cold becomes background noise instead of threat. Another settling habit appears in an old family letter. Sometimes people slept with their feet toward the centre of a circle, blankets drawn tightly around legs, so the core warmth remained concentrated, while arms and shoulders radiated heat outward. You imagine stretching your legs toward a warm centre, now feeling heat ripple along your calves. You rise again, stepping away from the imagined group, but the warmth does not leave you immediately. It clings steady and patient even as the prairie wind brushes your cheeks. You inhale deeply, feeling the lingering echo of human closeness inside your chest. Then you take another step forward into the quiet night, carrying that inner warmth with you alive beneath your coat, and steadying your path beneath the wide silver sky. You continue walking through the dim prairie until the horizon disappears, entirely swallowed by a curtain of soft darkness that feels thicker than any night before. The cold smooths itself across your cheeks in long, slow strokes, almost gentle now rather than sharp. Your breath curls upward like pale smoke, vanishing into the vast sky above. You pause for a moment, letting the silence deepen, and your thoughts settle on one of the oldest, simplest warmth-keeping habits used across the frontier: breath control. Not meditation by name, not anything dressed in spiritual language, but deliberate breathing used to keep the body steady, calm and warm when no fire shelter or companion could come to your aid. You close your eyes briefly and inhale, tasting the metallic chill. Documentation left by travellers consistently remarks upon the importance of breathing slowly through the nose during bitter nights, allowing cold air to warm slightly before reaching the lungs. You mimic the technique, now drawing the cold air and gently letting your chest expand without haste. The warmth that rises inside you is small, but unmistakable, like a faint ember glowing at the centre of your ribs. You exhale slowly, feeling the heat linger beneath your coat. The breath leaves you in a soft cloud drifting upward into the endless dark. You take another inhalation, steady and patient, the way countless frontier wanderers must have done, while huddling under blankets or standing guard in moonlit silence. You shift your feet, letting the movement send warmth through your legs. A subtle oddity mentioned in an old notebook describes people blowing warm breath into their cupped hands, then pressing those hands briefly against their chest or neck to circulate heat outward. You imagine doing that now, your warm palms touching your throat, sending a flush of heat across your skin before the cold returns. You walk a little farther, the prairie opening like a slow exhale beneath your boots. With each breath, your mind clears your shoulders, loosen, and your warmth steadies. Breath becomes both shield and quiet companion. You pause beside a low patch of grass and kneel. The ground feels cold under your knee, but your breath warms your chest enough to soften the sensation. You place your hands on the earth and breathe deeply again, letting the warmth seep outward through your arms. The night seems to hush itself around your breathing, adjusting to your rhythm. Those who study the period interpret this practice in strikingly different ways. Some believe people use slower, deeper breathing intentionally to conserve body heat. Others argue it was simply a natural response to stillness, a rhythm born not from strategy, but from the quiet acceptance of the night. The surviving descriptions never align perfectly, leaving you free to imagine it in whichever form feels true. You stand again, stretching your arms beneath your coat. Warmth gathers inside your chest as you breathe flowing outward like a gentle wave. You begin to move in a slow pattern. Inhale for a few steps, exhale for a few more, letting breath and motion blend into one fluid gesture. The prairie responds by softening around you, the wind quieter, the cold less insistent. You tilt your face toward the sky, inhaling deeply as the stars shimmer above you like scattered frost. Your breath warms your throat, your chest, your core. You feel the warmth radiate into your shoulders and down your spine. With each slow breath, your body settles, becoming both shelter and source of heat. Another faint recollection from A Miner's Tale tells of workers breathing through a small fold of cloth during cold nights underground, trapping a little warmth near their faces. You lift an imaginary scarf, now covering your mouth lightly, feeling your breath collect beneath the fabric and warm the air you inhale. The sensation is soothing, like leaning into a gentle, familiar fire. You walk forward, your breath slow and deliberate, warming your body from within. You know now that cold is not always an enemy. Sometimes it simply asks you to learn the quiet skill of tending your own warmth. You take a final deep breath, feeling your chest glow softly in the night. Then you release it slow and calm, letting the warmth linger as you continue across the prairie. The night grows softer as you continue walking your steps, falling gently across the grass. The cold no longer reaches for you with sharp fingers. It drifts instead like a faint memory, distant and harmless. Each breath moves in and out of you with unhurried ease, your body warming itself with simple rhythm. The stars above seem to glow more warmly now, their light spreading like a delicate veil across the sky. You let your shoulders relax, feeling your coat settle around you in a comforting weight. The wind has lost its urgency and now wanders past you with the softness of a sigh. Your footsteps slow. The prairie, so wide and restless before, seems to cradle you in quiet arms. You listen to the faint hush of the grass brushing against your boots, the gentle rise and fall of your breath. Everything feels steady. Everything feels calm. You pause, closing your eyes for a moment. Warmth gathers at your center, spreading in long, smooth waves that drift to your fingertips, your cheeks, the tips of your ears. You let that warmth settle deeper, sinking into your muscles, loosening the last traces of tension. The dark around you is softened into a velvety blue, and the air seems to hold you rather than push against you. You take another slow breath deeper this time and feel your entire body respond with quiet gratitude. The night carries your warmth gently without taking more than you offer. Each inhale becomes softer, each exhale becomes a release. You open your eyes again to a peaceful sky, wide and patient. You take a final step forward, then another, moving through the prairie, as though floating, wrapped in stillness and warmth. And here in this quiet, endless night, you let yourself drift gently toward rest.